My name is Vanessa, and I am 34 years old. 5 months into my marriage, my mother-in-law slid a piece of paper across the dining table in front of our entire extended family. It was an invoice for $7,500. Your apartment is family property, she announced with a smug smile. It is time you stop freeloading and pay rent. I did not scream or cry. I just wiped my mouth, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then I will just pack up and go back to my own apartment." My husband turned pale and whispered, "What apartment?" He had no idea that the luxury building his mother claimed to own actually belonged to me. Before I reveal the look on their faces when the truth came out, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to put a toxic mother-in-law in her place. Growing up in the foster care system taught me one absolute truth about the world: you can only rely on yourself. I spent my childhood bouncing between crowded homes in Chicago, learning to be invisible, learning to read the room, and most importantly, learning the value of financial independence. That survival instinct drove me to become a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on tracking missing money, exposing corporate fraud, and unearthing the financial secrets people desperately tried to hide. I was very good at my job. By the time I met Liam, I had built a substantial net worth operating entirely through a private limited liability company to purchase prime real estate across the city. I liked keeping my wealth completely invisible. Liam presented himself as the perfect catch. He was handsome, charming, and claimed to be the heir to a wealthy real estate family. When we were dating, he constantly talked about his mother Beatrice and her sprawling property empire. He drove a luxury car, wore designer suits, and insisted on paying for our expensive dinners. He swept me off my feet, offering the kind of family belonging I had craved my entire life. When we got married, Liam convinced me to sell the modest starter home I lived in. He told me his mother owned a beautiful high-rise condo downtown and wanted us to live there rent-free as a wedding gift. It seemed like a generous gesture, allowing us to save money for our future. I agreed, keeping my own real estate portfolio a closely guarded secret, waiting for the right time to share my success with him. The reality of marrying into Beatrice's family was a cold awakening. Beatrice was a woman who wore her perceived status like a weapon. Her house in the wealthy suburbs was a monument to bad taste and ostentatious displays of wealth. Every surface was covered in gold accents, velvet, and oversized family portraits. She treated everyone around her like hired help, and she made it abundantly clear from day one that I did not meet her pedigree standards. To Beatrice, I was just the foster kid who had somehow tricked her wealthy son into marriage. That Sunday family dinner was supposed to be a celebration of my sister-in-law Chelsea and her recent engagement. Chelsea was 31 years old, completely spoiled, and functionally allergic to hard work. She was the golden child, entirely dependent on her mother and brother, yet she carried herself with the arrogance of a self-made billionaire. The dining room was packed with aunts, uncles, and cousins, all drinking expensive wine and listening to Chelsea brag about her upcoming wedding. She was waving her hands around, describing a custom floral archway that cost more than most people make in a year. "The wedding is going to be easily $100,000, Chelsea boasted, taking a sip of her champagne. "But you only get married once and the family reputation is on the line. We simply must host the event of the season." I sat quietly at the end of the table, cutting my roasted chicken and keeping my thoughts to myself. I had learned early on that offering any input at these dinners only gave Beatrice ammunition to insult my background. Liam sat next to me, laughing too loudly at his uncle's jokes, playing the role of the successful young heir. Suddenly, Beatrice stood up from the head of the table. She picked up a silver spoon and clinked it sharply against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, ringing sound instantly silenced the room. All conversation halted, and 20 faces turned to look at the matriarch of the family. Beatrice smoothed down her silk blouse and offered the room a tight, predatory smile. "Family is the most important thing in the world," Beatrice began, her voice projecting clearly across the long mahogany table. "We support each other. We lift each other up. And most importantly, We protect the legacy that this family has built through decades of hard work and savvy real estate investments. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the older relatives. Chelsea beamed clearly, assuming the speech was going to culminate in a massive financial gift for her extravagant wedding. I took a slow sip of my water, a familiar knot of tension tightening in my stomach. I knew Beatrice's speeches. They always started with grandeur and ended with a targeted humiliation. However, Beatrice continued locking her sharp gaze directly onto me. A strong family cannot thrive if there is a weak link. It cannot prosper if someone is taking advantage of our generosity without contributing to the pot. We are not a charity, and we certainly do not run a foster home for adults who never learned how to pull their own weight. The silence in the dining room became suffocating. The aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably in their high-backed chairs. Chelsea let out a low, mocking chuckle, leaning forward to get a better look at my face. Beside me, I felt Liam go completely rigid. He stared straight ahead at his empty plate, his jaw clenched, refusing to look at his mother or at me. Beatrice picked up a crisp white envelope from the table beside her. She walked slowly down the length of the dining room, the clicking of her heels echoing loudly against the hardwood floor. Every eye tracked her movement until she stopped right behind my chair. She reached over my shoulder and dropped the envelope onto my plate right on top of my half-eaten meal. "Open it," Vanessa Beatrice commanded. Her voice dropped the artificial sweetness, revealing the cold authority underneath. "I want everyone here to understand exactly how generous we have been to you and why that free ride is officially over." My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. Years of interrogating hostile witnesses and auditing fraudulent executives had trained me to remain completely unbothered under pressure. I calmly wiped my hands on my linen napkin, picked up the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was an invoice printed on a cheap home printer. At the top, in a bold, generic font, it read, "Beatrice Property Management." Below that was my name, my condo address, and a list of charges. Rent for the past 5 months calculated at $1,500 per month. The total amount due at the bottom of the page was circled in thick red ink. $7,500. I stared at the paper. As a forensic accountant, my brain immediately registered a dozen red flags. There was no corporate tax identification number. The address listed for the property management company was Beatrice's residential home. There were no standard late fees, no legal disclosures, just a blatant amateur demand for cash. It was not a legal document, it was a shakedown. "I understand that you come from a background where people rely on handouts," Beatrice said loudly, ensuring her voice reached the furthest corners of the room. "But in this family, we work for what we have. Liam moved you into one of my most exclusive downtown properties. Do you have any idea what that condo would rent for on the open market? I am doing you a massive favor by only charging you $1,500 a month." I looked up from the paper, meeting her eyes. "When Liam and I got married, you explicitly told me the condo was a wedding gift. You said we could live there rent-free so we could build our savings." Chelsea scoffed loudly from across the table. "Oh, please, Vanessa. Nothing in this world is free. Liam's money is tied up in important family investments right now. He is funding my wedding, taking care of the business, doing actual work. You have been living in a luxury high-rise for 5 months without paying a single dime. You are literally leeching off our mother's real estate empire. It is pathetic." I turned my head slightly to look at Liam. My husband, the man who had promised to protect and cherish me, was sinking lower into his chair. He looked terrified. The picture of the wealthy, confident heir was entirely shattered. Beatrice said sharply, "Tell your wife how things work in the real world. Tell her that it is time she started contributing to this family instead of just taking up space in my building." The entire room waited. The aunts and uncles watched with morbid curiosity. Chelsea was practically vibrating with excitement, thrilled to see the outsider being put in her place. I waited for Liam to speak, to defend our marriage, to remind his mother of her own words and promises. I waited for him to be the man I thought I had married. Instead, Liam leaned close to my ear. His breath was shaky, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper meant only for me. Vanessa, please, just pay it. You have a good job. You know how hard Mom worked to build this empire. Just write the check so we can get through dinner without a scene. I will make it up to you later. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. He was not going to defend me. Worse than that, he was completely complicit. He had known this ambush was coming. He had brought me to this dinner specifically so his mother could corner me and humiliate me into handing over my hard-earned money. They thought they could bully the orphan girl because they assumed she had no one to turn to and nowhere else to go. They thought they held all the power because they owned the building. But they had made one massive catastrophic miscalculation. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. I placed the forged invoice neatly on the table and folded my hands over it. The show was just beginning, and I was about to rewrite the entire script. I turned my head to look fully at Liam. The man sitting beside me was practically sweating. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. He refused to make eye contact with me, keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the polished wood. The silence in the dining room stretched tight like a piano wire. Every single person at that table was waiting for me to break. They expected tears. They expected an apology. They expected me to pull out my checkbook and blindly hand over my hard-earned money just to buy their conditional acceptance. Liam nudged my knee under the table. "Just pay it," he whispered. Again, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and irritation. "You have the money, Vanessa. Stop making a scene and just pay her so we can move on." I did not lower my voice when I replied. My tone was crisp, clear, and projected effortlessly across the dead silent room. "Pay for what exactly, Liam?" I asked, holding his gaze until he was forced to finally look at me. "You want me to pay for the privilege of living in this so-called family empire? You mean the empire you bragged about non-stop for a year? The same empire you used as an excuse when you convinced me to sell my beautiful starter home. You sat in my living room, held my hands, and begged me to sell the house I bought with my own money. You swore that moving into your mother's condo would save us thousands of dollars a year, so we could build a massive joint savings account. You told me it was a wedding gift free and clear because your family took care of their own." The color drained from Liam's face instantly. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Across the table, Chelsea stopped smirking. Several aunts exchanged wide-eyed, uncomfortable glances. Exposing private marital conversations in public was considered a massive breach of etiquette in Beatrice's world, but I was not playing by her rules anymore. "That is an outrageous distortion of the facts," Beatrice snapped, taking a step closer to my chair. Her face flushed an angry mottled red. "We generously allowed you to stay there to get on your feet. But you are a married woman now. You are part of a family that expects contribution. You sold a tiny, insignificant little house in a terrible neighborhood. You should be thanking me on your knees for upgrading your lifestyle. Now you owe me $7,500 for the past 5 months. And moving forward, I expect $1,500 on the first of every single month. If you refuse, I will gladly find a tenant who appreciates the value of my property." I picked up the printed invoice again, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. It was almost laughable. The sheer arrogance it took to print a fake bill, march it out during a family dinner, and demand cash without a single legal contract to back it up. They really thought I was just some clueless girl they could intimidate. They forgot what I do for a living. I track liars, I audit frauds, I dismantle financial illusions brick by brick. And sitting at this table looking at my husband cowering and my mother-in-law demanding extortion money, the illusion of the wealthy, benevolent real estate family completely shattered. I placed the piece of paper back down on the table and pushed it away. "I am not paying this," I stated calmly. "I am not paying you $7,500 today, and I am not paying you $1,500 next month. I am not paying you a single dime." Beatrice gasped, clutching a hand to her chest in mock horror. "How dare you? You ungrateful, manipulative little leech. After everything we have done for you, you sit at my table, eat my food, and refuse to pay your debts. I am the owner of that building. You are a guest in my property. If you do not pay your rent, I will throw you out on the street tonight." Chelsea slammed her hand on the table. You heard her, Vanessa. Pay up or get out. You are ruining my engagement dinner with your poverty mindset. We do not tolerate freeloaders in the Blackwell family. Liam, handle your wife before Mom calls security and has her removed. Liam finally found his voice, though it cracked pathetically. Vanessa, please, just write the check. We can talk about this at home. Just give her the money. I stood up from my chair. The movement was slow and deliberate. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt and picked up my purse. The entire room watched me breathless, waiting for my breaking point. But I felt nothing but absolute ice-cold control. There is nothing to talk about at home, Liam, I said, looking down at the man I had married. Because I'm not going back to that condo tonight, and I am certainly not paying your mother a penny. Beatrice crossed her arms, a triumphant sneer replacing her shock. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully bullied me into running away. Fine, Beatrice spat out. Pack your cheap bags and leave my property. I want your keys on my desk by morning. We will see how long you last out there without our family supporting you. You will be begging to come back by tomorrow. I smiled at her. It was a genuine, relaxed smile that clearly unsettled her. I highly doubt that, Beatrice, I replied softly. I will just go back to my apartment. The dining room was dead silent. Liam frowned, confusion wrinkling his forehead. He stood up, reaching a hand out toward me, but stopped short of actually touching my arm. What apartment? Liam asked, his voice echoing in the quiet room. You sold your house. You do not have anywhere else to go. What apartment are you talking about? I looked at his bewildered face, then at Beatrice, whose triumphant sneer was slowly melting into a look of deep suspicion. I did not owe them an explanation right now. I wanted them to sit in their confusion. I wanted them to panic. I wanted Liam to realize that the woman he thought he had trapped was holding cards he could not even begin to comprehend. Do not worry about it, Liam, I said, my tone light and breezy. I will send for the rest of my things tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, everyone. Congratulations on your engagement, Chelsea. I am sure the wedding will be as spectacular as your budget allows. I turned my back on the entire Blackwell family and walked out of the dining room. I did not rush. I took my time, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against their expensive hardwood floors. I could hear the eruption of voices the second I crossed the threshold into the hallway. Beatrice was shouting about my disrespect. Chelsea was complaining that her moment was ruined. I heard Liam calling my name, but his voice sounded distant and weak. He did not follow me. He stayed exactly where he belonged, sitting at his mother's table, terrified of her wrath. I walked out the front door and into the cool evening air. I pulled out my phone and ordered a luxury car service. As I stood on the pristine driveway waiting for my ride, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. The facade was finally over. The charade of the happy, loving family had burned to the ground in less than 20 minutes, and I was holding the match. They thought they had cornered a helpless victim. They thought they could extract my savings to fund their extravagant lifestyle while treating me like dirt on their expensive shoes. But Beatrice had made a fatal error. She had assumed her lies were bulletproof. She had assumed that because I grew up in foster care, I was uneducated, desperate, and easily intimidated by the illusion of wealth. My car arrived, a sleek black sedan that pulled smoothly up to the curb. I climbed into the back seat and gave the driver the address to the downtown high-rise condo, the very same condo Beatrice had just tried to charge me for. I leaned my head against the cool leather seat and took a deep breath. I was not running away. I was going back to gather evidence. My husband had just shown me exactly who he was, and my mother-in-law had just handed me the thread that would unravel her entire life. It was time to go to work. The forensic accountant inside me was wide awake, calculating variables, noting discrepancies, and preparing for a comprehensive audit of the Blackwell family finances. I pulled out my tablet from my bag and connected to the secure cloud server where I kept my private financial documents. I opened the folder labeled Real Estate Holdings. There were several files inside detailing properties I had acquired over the last 6 years through my private limited liability company. I scrolled past the commercial spaces and the suburban duplexes until I found the file I was looking for. I opened the deed. It was a legally binding government-registered document. It clearly listed the owner of the luxury downtown high-rise building. The entire building. Not just the condo Liam and I lived in, but every single unit, the penthouse lounge, the parking garage, and the commercial retail space on the ground floor. I smiled as I read the name of the ownership entity. It was my LLC. I owned the ground they walked on. I owned the roof over their heads. Beatrice Blackwell was not a real estate mogul. She did not own my condo. In fact, she did not own anything in that building. She was just the property manager the previous owner had hired, a contract my LLC had blindly inherited when I purchased the building 6 months ago. She was my employee, and my employee had just tried to extort her own boss. The ride back to the city felt incredibly short. I watched the skyline approach, the towering glass and steel structures glowing in the night. One of those glowing towers belonged to me. Beatrice wanted to play games with real estate. She wanted to demand rent and issue threats of eviction. She wanted to humiliate me in front of 20 people to feed her own ego. I locked my tablet and slid it back into my bag. I was going to give Beatrice exactly what she asked for. I was going to follow her rules. But when I finally laid my cards on the table, there would be nothing left of her precious empire. I was going to tear down the Blackwell facade, and I was going to start by finding out exactly where my husband was sending our money. I keyed the passcode into the electronic lock of the penthouse condo. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the pristine and modern living space I had spent the last 5 months calling home. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. I dropped my keys on the marble entryway console and kicked off my heels. The silence of the empty apartment was a stark contrast to the shouting match I had just left behind at the Blackwell estate. I did not waste time pouring a drink or changing out of my dress. I went straight to the home office we shared. I needed to understand Liam's finances before he returned. I booted up my secure laptop and pulled up our joint banking records. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Liam had insisted on merging our primary checking accounts right after the honeymoon. He claimed it was what successful couples did to build trust and transparency. I had agreed to the joint account for household expenses, but I kept my business revenue and investment portfolios entirely separate. Now, looking at the joint ledger, the numbers painted a glaring picture of absolute betrayal. I applied a quick filter to categorize the outgoing cash flow over the last 90 days. The results made my blood run cold. There were large and unexplained cash withdrawals from machines located near Beatrice neighborhood. I found transfer payments labeled as dinner or gifts that amounted to hundreds of dollars a week, all routed directly to accounts linked to Chelsea and Beatrice. There were multiple charges for a high-end bridal boutique, a luxury catering service, and a premium florist. He was bleeding us dry to fund his sister and her ridiculous wedding. He had been quietly siphoning my paycheck into the Blackwell family vanity fund. 2 hours later, the front door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the expensive picture frames hanging in the hallway. Liam was home. I closed the banking tabs and leaned back in my leather office chair, waiting in the shadows of the room. Heavy and angry footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor. Liam burst into the office, his tie loosened and his face flushed a deep and angry crimson. His chest heaved as he glared at me, sitting calmly at the desk. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "Are you completely insane? You humiliated my mother in front of the entire family. You made me look like a weak and pathetic fool in front of my uncles. You managed that entirely on your own." "Liam," I said, keeping my voice level and perfectly calm. "I simply refuse to be extorted by a woman who thinks she can print fake invoices and demand cash at a dinner party." "It is not extortion," he yelled, pacing the length of the small office like a caged animal. "It is rent. You live here. You use the utilities. You enjoy the luxury amenities. Mom built this building from the ground up, and you treated her like she was some common street scammer. A fake invoice is a scam, Liam. If she wanted rent, she should have presented a legal lease agreement before we moved in, not ambushed me 5 months later in front of 20 relatives." Liam stopped pacing and leaned over the desk, invading my space. "And what exactly was that comment about your apartment? What are you hiding from me, Vanessa? You sold your house. You put that money into our joint savings. At least you said you did. Are you hoarding assets behind my back after everything my family has done to welcome you? He was trying to pivot. He was trying to put me on the defensive. It was classic manipulation, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. You mean the family that just tried to shake me down for $7,500? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I am not hiding anything that you have a right to know, but I am certainly not paying your mother a single dime for living in this unit. You owe her! Liam screamed, spit flying from his lips. He slammed his fist on the desk. She gave us this place. She gave us a lifestyle you could never have afforded on your own. You grew up in the foster system, Vanessa. You have no idea how wealthy families operate. We protect our assets. Mom is just making sure you are invested in the family portfolio. Invested. I repeated, standing up slowly so I was at eye level with him. Paying $1,500 a month in untraceable cash is not an investment, Liam. It is a shakedown. And you sat there and told me to just pay it. You wanted me to hand over my salary to your mother without a single question. Because it is the right thing to do. He shot back, his voice strained. You are an accountant, Vanessa. You crunch numbers for a living. Do the math. You are living in a luxury high-rise. $1,500 a month is an absolute steal, and you threw it right back in her face. If it is such a steal, I said, closing the distance between us, then prove it. Prove she owns this place. Liam blinked, the sudden shift in my tactic catching him completely off guard. What? You heard me, I said, keeping my tone deadpan. Prove Beatrice owns this condo. Better yet, prove she owns this building. You keep talking about the Blackwell real estate empire. You keep demanding I pay respect and cash to the owner, so show me the deed. Liam let out a forced and high-pitched laugh that sounded completely unnatural. You are being ridiculous. I do not carry the property deeds to my mother and her real estate portfolio in my back pocket. But you have access to them, I challenged, taking another step forward, forcing him to back up toward the doorway. You are the heir to the empire, right? That is what you told me when we met. You told me you manage the family business. If she owns this unit, show me the deed. Show me the property tax records. Show me a title insurance policy. Show me any legal document bearing her name as the proprietor of this building. Panic flared in Liam's eyes. It was a brief and sharp flash of pure terror, quickly masked by blustering anger. He looked away, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an excuse hidden in the corners of the ceiling. I do not have to prove anything to you. He stammered, his voice losing its booming volume and dropping into a defensive whine. My mother is a highly respected businesswoman in this city. Everyone knows she owns this property. You are just trying to deflect because you got caught hiding a secret apartment. I am not deflecting, I pressed, keeping my gaze locked onto his panicked face. I am asking for basic legal documentation before I hand over thousands of dollars. It is literally my professional job to verify financial claims, Liam. So show me the deed. If your mother owns this condo, I will write the check right now. If you can pull up the county tax assessment website and show me Beatrice Blackwell listed as the registered owner, I will apologize to her tomorrow and pay the invoice in full. I watched him swallow hard. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the light from the desk lamp. He knew he could not produce the deed because he knew his mother did not own the building. But he did not know that I already knew the absolute truth. He thought he was just protecting a desperate lie, trying to keep his elaborate facade from crumbling around him. You are completely out of your mind, Liam said, his voice dropping into a vicious and defensive sneer. You are paranoid. This is exactly why my mother did not want me to marry you. She said you would be untrusting. She said girls from the system always have a chip on their shoulder, always suspecting successful people of trying to ruin them. Leave my background out of this, I warned, my tone dropping to a dangerous and icy whisper. This is about a fake invoice and a demand for cash. Show me the deed right now. I am not playing this game with you, Liam shouted, pushing past me into the hallway. I am not going to indulge your crazy conspiracy theories. My mother gave us a beautiful home and you spat in her face. I followed him down the hall, matching his frantic pace. Where are the property records, Liam? Why are you so afraid to show them to me? What are you hiding from your own wife? I am not hiding anything, he yelled, grabbing his coat from the entryway console. He was moving frantically, practically ripping the fabric as he shoved his arms into the sleeves. He was desperate to escape the interrogation. He could not answer my basic questions, and his only remaining defense mechanism was a cowardly retreat. If you are not hiding anything, open your laptop and log into the county clerk database, I demanded, standing between him and the front door with my arms crossed. It takes exactly 2 minutes to verify property ownership in this state. Do it right now. Clear your mother and her name. Liam shoved past me, his shoulder hitting mine as he grabbed the heavy brass doorknob. You need serious psychiatric help, Vanessa. You are having some kind of mental breakdown. I am not staying here to be interrogated by my own wife over a simple and standard rent request. It is not a rent request, I said, my voice rising to match his rising panic. It is a scam, and you are completely in on it. You knew she was going to demand that money tonight at dinner. You set me up to be ambushed. You are crazy, Liam spat, pulling the door open and stepping out into the brightly lit corridor. You are completely unhinged. Call my mother when you are ready to apologize and pay what you owe her. Until then, do not even bother calling my phone. He stormed out into the hall, slamming the heavy oak door so hard the walls of the condo vibrated. I stood alone in the entryway, listening to his rapid and heavy footsteps retreating down the hallway toward the elevator bank. He was running away because he knew he was trapped in a lie. He could not produce a deed that did not exist. He could not defend a financial illusion that was rapidly falling apart. And as the elevator doors chimed and closed, taking my treacherous husband away, I smiled in the quiet apartment. He was protecting his mother and her lies, but he had just handed me all the ammunition I needed to destroy them both. The silence that followed his departure was not heavy or oppressive. It was the sound of absolute clarity. I walked back into the office, my mind calculating the next phase of my audit. They wanted a war over real estate and money. They were about to learn that they had challenged the wrong woman. I barely slept that night. My mind was a whirlwind of numbers, ledgers, and the sickening reality of Liam's betrayal. I was up at 6, drinking black coffee and running deeper audits on my secure laptop. Liam had not returned, and his absence was a loud confirmation of his guilt. I was deep into a spreadsheet tracing irregular transfers to a floral designer when the frantic buzzing of the intercom shattered the quiet morning. I checked the video monitor panel on the wall. Chelsea was standing in the lobby, tapping her foot impatiently and glaring at the camera. I sighed, pressed the release button, and waited by the front door. I knew exactly why she was here. She was Beatrice's attack dog, sent to enforce the extortion demand, while Liam hid from the fallout. 10 minutes later, loud, aggressive knocking hammered against my door. I opened it to find Chelsea standing in the hallway, looking like she had stepped out of a reality television show. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, a pristine yoga outfit that had clearly never seen a gym, and carried a completely empty tote bag. She did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, her shoulder intentionally knocking into mine as she barged into the entryway of the condo. "Where is Liam?" she demanded, not bothering to take off her shoes as she marched across the hardwood floor. "He did not come home last night," I replied evenly, closing the door and leaning against it. "I assume he is hiding at your mother's house." "What do you want, Chelsea? It is 7 in the morning. I want what is owed to my family," she said, pulling off her sunglasses and glaring at me. "You completely embarrassed my mother last night. You ruined my engagement dinner with your tacky, low-class dramatic display. You think you can just walk out on a debt and pretend nothing happened. Mom sent me to collect. If you will not write the check for the $7,500 you owe her, then I am taking collateral." "Collateral?" I repeated, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across my face. "You are trying to repossess my belongings to cover a fake rent invoice. Are you out of your mind?" "It is not a fake invoice," Chelsea snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You live in a Blackwell building. You owe Blackwell money. You are nothing but a foster kid trying to leech off old money, and we are putting an end to it right now. Mom said you have a collection of vintage designer handbags in the master closet. Those should cover a few months of your freeloading. Move out of my way. She turned and marched toward the master bedroom. I watched her go, genuinely astounded by her audacity. She truly believed her family's supposed wealth gave her the right to commit blatant theft. She believed I was so intimidated by their status that I would just stand back and watch her steal my personal property. She was severely mistaken. I did not run after her. I walked calmly down the hallway, reaching the bedroom just as she flung open the doors to my walk-in closet. She gasped, her eyes widening as she took in the carefully organized shelves displaying my collection. It was a substantial collection, acquired over years of hard work and smart investments, long before I ever met Liam. Chelsea reached out her manicured hands, grasping the handles of a rare, pristine condition Birkin bag. "This one will do nicely," she declared, pulling it off the shelf. "Mom can sell this to one of her friends to recoup the money you stole from us. You probably bought this with Liam's credit card anyway." "Put the bag down." "Chelsea," I said, my voice dangerously low. I stepped into the closet, blocking the exit. "You are currently trespassing in my home and attempting grand larceny. Put it down and walk out the front door before I call the police." Chelsea turned to face me, clutching the handbag tightly to her chest. She laughed, a harsh and grating sound. "You are not going to call the police, Vanessa. You would not dare drag the Blackwell name through the mud like that. Liam would divorce you in a second if you called the cops on his sister. And this is not your home. It belongs to my mother. She authorized me to secure payment for the rent you refused to pay. Now get out of my way. I am taking this bag, and I am taking that Chanel one too." She lunged forward, trying to shove past me, holding the Birkin like a shield. She expected me to shrink back, to cower, just as Liam did when Beatrice raised her voice. But I did not move an inch. As she tried to push past, I reached out and caught her wrist in a grip that was entirely unyielding. My fingers clamped down tight, stopping her momentum instantly. Chelsea gasped, her eyes snapping to mine in shock. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling to pull her arm away. "You are hurting me." I applied a fraction more pressure, just enough to let her know I was in complete control of the situation. I grew up fighting for survival in group homes. "Chelsea," I said, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. "I have dealt with bullies far more frightening than a spoiled princess who thinks she is entitled to steal my property. Drop the bag. Now." Her bravado faltered. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by genuine fear, as she realized I was not playing her game. She dropped the Birkin. It hit the carpeted floor of the closet with a soft thud. I released her wrist immediately, but I did not step back. "You are a psycho!" she gasped, rubbing her wrist and backing away from me until she hit the closet wall. "You are violent and completely unhinged. Liam warned us about you. He said you were unstable. Did he?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Did he also tell you that he is broke? Did he mention that the money he is supposed to be managing for this so-called family empire is entirely non-existent? Because from what I can see on his banking ledgers, he is completely drowning in debt, and he has been using my paycheck to fund your ridiculous wedding." Chelsea's eyes narrowed, a flash of defensive anger returning. "You are lying. Liam is a senior executive. My wedding is being paid for by the family trust, not your pathetic little salary. You are just jealous because you are a nobody from nowhere, and I am a Blackwell." "You are a Blackwell living in a fantasy world," I retorted, stepping closer and forcing her out of the closet and back into the bedroom. "Your family trust is empty, Chelsea. Liam is maxing out credit cards to pay your florists, and your mother is trying to extort me for rent because she is desperate for cash. You are all broke, and you are trying to shake me down to keep your extravagant illusion alive." "That is a lie," she screamed, pointing a finger at my face. "You are just a bitter, jealous orphan. My mother owns this building. She is a real estate mogul. She is worth millions. We do not need your money. We just demand respect." "Then why are you here at 7 in the morning trying to steal my handbags?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. If Beatrice is a millionaire, why is she printing fake invoices on computer paper to demand $7,500? Real estate moguls do not send their daughters to repossess purses, Chelsea. They send lawyers. But Beatrice cannot send a lawyer, can she? Because she does not own this building. Chelsea froze. Her mouth opened, but she seemed completely incapable of forming a response. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. She knew her mother's financial demands were shady, but she had blindly followed orders, entirely convinced of her family's untouchable superiority. Now faced with absolute defiance and the cold, hard logic of my questions, the cracks in her reality were beginning to show. "Get out of my apartment!" I commanded, my voice echoing in the large bedroom. "You walk out that door, and you tell Beatrice that her extortion attempt failed. You tell her that if she ever sends you here to steal from me again, I will have you arrested for breaking and entering." "I am not leaving without that money," Chelsea stubbornly insisted, though. Her voice shook. "Mom said not to come back empty-handed. She needs that cash for the caterer deposit today, or they are going to cancel my engagement party." She clamped a hand over her mouth immediately after the words spilled out. Her eyes widened in horror. She had just confirmed exactly what I suspected. The entire rent demand, the public humiliation at dinner, the fake invoice, all of it was a desperate, coordinated plot to steal my money to pay for Chelsea's party. Beatrice was out of funds, Liam's credit was maxed out, and I was their designated target for an emergency cash injection. I stared at her, absorbing the monumental stupidity of her confession. "So, that is what this is," I said, a slow, humorless laugh escaping me. "Beatrice needs $7,500 to pay your caterer. And she decided to invent a fake rent debt to force me to cover it. Your engagement party is being funded by extortion." Chelsea was backing away toward the bedroom door, her face a mask of panic. "You are twisting my words. That is not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant," I said, following her down the hallway, driving her toward the front door. "You just admitted that your mother is desperate for cash. You just admitted that the Blackwell Empire cannot even afford a catering deposit. You are all frauds, Chelsea, every single one of you, and you thought you could use me as your personal ATM." I reached the front door and threw it open. The hallway outside was empty and quiet. I pointed toward the elevator. "Get out!" I ordered, my voice ringing with finality. "And tell Beatrice her little scheme is over. Tell Liam he can stay at his mother's house because he is not welcome back here. You can all drown in your debt together, but you are not dragging me down with you." Chelsea scurried out the door, clutching her empty tote bag like a lifeline. She did not look back. She practically ran down the hall, desperate to escape the consequences of her failed theft and her accidental confession. I watched her slam the button for the elevator, her shoulders hunched in defeat. I closed the heavy oak door and locked it. The encounter had confirmed everything. My husband and his family were broke, desperate, and entirely reliant on manipulation to maintain their facade. They needed cash immediately, and they were willing to commit fraud to get it. They thought I was a vulnerable target, but they had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle. I walked back to my office and sat down at the desk. The audit was complete. It was time to spring the trap. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind Chelsea before I was back at my desk. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, replaced by the icy, methodical focus that made me a top-tier forensic accountant. My husband had just abandoned me after demanding I pay a fake invoice, and his sister had practically confessed to a coordinated extortion attempt to fund her wedding. It was time to stop arguing and start compiling evidence. I needed a complete, undeniable picture of the financial rot at the core of the Blackwell family. I opened my secure laptop and pulled up the joint checking and savings accounts Liam and I shared. Previously, I had only skimmed the surface, filtering for large recent withdrawals. Now I intended to conduct a deep line-by-line audit stretching back to the day we merged our finances. My fingers flew across the keyboard, exporting transaction histories into a customized spreadsheet I had built for tracking corporate embezzlement. I applied color-coded filters for recurring transfers, cash withdrawals, and vendor payments. The pattern emerged within minutes, and it was staggering. It wasn't just a few $1,000s here and there. Liam had systematically drained nearly $40,000 from our joint savings over the past 4 months. Every time I deposited my paycheck or a bonus from a private consultation, large chunks of cash were immediately siphoned out. I traced the routing numbers: $5,000 transferred to an account registered to Beatrice Blackwell, $10,000 wired to a luxury catering company, $3,000 paid to a boutique floral designer, $8,000 sent directly to a high-end bridal salon. Liam wasn't just contributing to his sister's wedding. He was entirely funding it with my money. The Blackwell family trust Chelsea had bragged about was a complete fabrication. There was no trust. There was only my salary, and Liam was stealing it to maintain the illusion that his family was wealthy enough to host a $100,000 event. The sheer brazenness of the theft was breathtaking. He had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, and quietly robbed me blind to impress his mother and sister. I saved the spreadsheets to an encrypted external drive. That was piece one of the puzzle. Now I needed piece two. I needed to prove exactly how Beatrice was executing her side of the fraud. I closed the banking tabs and opened a specialized, highly secure web portal. This was the back-end management system for my real estate limited liability company. It was the nerve center of my hidden portfolio where I tracked rental income maintenance requests and tenant ledgers for every property I owned across the city. I navigated to the dashboard for the downtown high-rise building. When I purchased the property 6 months ago, I had intentionally kept the existing property management company in place. It was a strategic decision to ensure a smooth transition of ownership without disrupting the current tenants. Beatrice was simply an employee of that management company assigned to oversee the day-to-day operations of this specific building. She collected her salary from the management firm, which in turn reported to my LLC. I pulled up the tenant occupancy log for the building. It was a comprehensive list of every unit showing which ones were occupied, the names of the leaseholders, and the monthly rent generated. I scrolled down the list past the corporate executives on the lower floors and the wealthy retirees on the upper levels. I located the entry for the penthouse condo, the very unit I was currently sitting in. I stared at the screen, a grim smile touching my lips. According to the official property management records, the penthouse condo was currently listed as vacant. Beatrice had not logged Liam and me as tenants. She had not registered a lease agreement with the management company. By keeping the unit officially vacant in the system, she ensured that no rent was expected to be collected or reported to the building's owner. But the reality was entirely different. Beatrice had moved her son into the vacant unit, claiming she owned it, and was gifting him free rent. And now, desperate for cash to cover the remaining wedding deposits, she was demanding that I pay her directly in cash for living in an apartment she was hiding from the actual owner. She was actively stealing the use of the property and attempting to pocket the extortion money without any paper trail. It was a classic, albeit clumsy embezzlement scheme, and she was running it against the very woman who signed her employer's paychecks. I took screenshots of the occupancy log, ensuring the date and timestamps were clearly visible. I downloaded the system logs showing Beatrice's user ID marking the unit as vacant on the day we moved in. I compiled every piece of data into a single devastating dossier. The picture was now complete. Liam was stealing from our joint accounts to fund his sister's wedding. Beatrice was embezzling property resources and attempting to extort rent under the guise of ownership to cover the rest. They were drowning in debt, living entirely on lies, and I was their chosen victim to keep the sinking ship afloat. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The anger had completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound sense of calm. They had chosen to play a dangerous game with a woman whose entire career was dedicated to destroying financial criminals. Beatrice wanted to pretend she was a powerful real estate mogul. Liam wanted to pretend he was a wealthy heir. Chelsea wanted to pretend she was a high society bride. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city. The trap was fully set. I had the banking records. I had the property logs. I had the absolute proof of their fraud. I just needed the perfect moment to spring it. I needed a moment so public, so devastating that they could never recover from the humiliation. I needed a stage. And as I looked down at the street below, I realized exactly where that stage would be. Beatrice had a party to host, and I was going to be the main event. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in radio silence. I did not call Liam. I did not text Chelsea. I certainly did not reach out to Beatrice. I stayed in the penthouse working my actual corporate job, remotely watching the digital footprint of my husband shrink as his panic undoubtedly grew. He had not returned to the condo. His toothbrush remained dry in the master bathroom, and his side of the closet was untouched. He was hiding, waiting for his mother to strike the next blow. I knew Beatrice would not be able to handle the silence. Narcissists abhor a vacuum. They need a reaction, a target, a surrender. When her spoiled daughter returned empty-handed from her botched repossession attempt, Beatrice would have been furious. She needed her caterer paid. She needed her power validated. It happened on Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly earnings report for a legitimate client when a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against the heavy oak front door. It was not the polite tap of a delivery driver or the building concierge. It was a rapid, demanding pounding designed to startle whoever was inside. I did not rush. I saved my spreadsheet, locked my workstation, and walked down the hallway at a measured pace. By the time I reached the entryway, the knocking had stopped. I checked the security camera feed on the wall panel. The corridor was empty. Whoever had been there was already gone, fleeing the scene like a coward. But as I glanced down, I saw a thick manila envelope lying flat on the welcome mat, shoved roughly under the door gap. I picked it up. It had my full legal name printed on the front in bold block letters. There was no return address, no postage stamp. It had been hand-delivered. I took the envelope back to the kitchen island, sliced the top open with a letter opener, and pulled out a stack of 3 papers stapled together. The word printed at the very top of the first page made me burst into genuine, unrestrained laughter. Notice of immediate eviction. It was printed in an obnoxiously large, bright red font. I spread the pages out on the marble countertop and leaned over them, letting the forensic accountant in me dissect this absolute masterpiece of amateur fraud. Beatrice had clearly used a free online template, the kind you download from a shady legal advice blog. She had not even bothered to format it correctly. The margins were misaligned, and she had forgotten to remove the bracketed placeholder text in the second paragraph that read, "Insert landlord name here." But what it lacked in legal validity, it made up for in sheer unadulterated extortion. The document demanded the immediate surrender of the premises within 24 hours, unless the past due balance of $7,500 was paid in full. It listed Beatrice Blackwell as the sole owner and managing director of the property. But the real threat was buried in the third paragraph, typed out in aggressive, bold print. Failure to remit the full balance via certified bank check will result in immediate legal action. Furthermore, this delinquent debt will be reported to all 3 major credit bureaus. Your financial standing will be permanently damaged, your credit score will be ruined, and a formal eviction record will prevent you from ever securing luxury housing in this city again. Do not test me, Vanessa. I ran my fingers over the typed words. She had actually put her extortion threat in writing. She had mailed me a signed confession of her intent to commit financial blackmail. Beatrice knew my background. Liam had told her everything. She knew I grew up with absolutely nothing, bouncing around the foster care system, with all my belongings packed in garbage bags. She knew that my pristine credit score, my savings, and my financial stability were my armor against the world. To someone like me, a ruined credit score and an eviction record were death sentences. They meant homelessness. They meant a return to the poverty I had clawed my way out of. Beatrice was banking on that childhood trauma. She thought threatening my financial record would trigger a panic response, forcing me to empty my bank accounts to appease her. She thought my fear of being poor again was greater than my intelligence. She was dead wrong. My phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID flashed Beatrice. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my coffee before swiping to answer. I did not say hello. I just brought the receiver to my ear and waited. "I assume you received my notice," Beatrice said. Her voice was dripping with condescension, sharp and cold. "I did," I replied evenly. "The formatting is atrocious, Beatrice. You left the placeholder text in the second paragraph." If you are going to threaten someone with illegal eviction, you should at least proofread the document. I heard her inhale sharply, furious that I was not sobbing or begging. You think this is a joke, Vanessa? You think you can smart-mouth your way out of a debt? I am giving you one last chance to do the right thing. You have 24 hours to bring a certified check for $7,500 to my house. If you do not, I am calling my contacts at the credit bureaus. I will flag your social security number. I will tank your immaculate little credit score so fast your head will spin. You will not even be able to finance a used car when I am done with you. I tapped my fingernail against the marble countertop, matching the rhythm of my pulse. You cannot report a debt to the credit bureaus without a signed lease agreement, Beatrice. We never signed a lease. We never signed any financial contract. You have no legal standing to report anything. You lived in my building for 5 months, she snapped back, her voice raising in pitch. That constitutes a verbal contract in this state. And I have lawyers on retainer who specialize in destroying ungrateful tenants. I will bury you in legal fees. I will tie you up in court until you are bankrupt. You are a nobody, Vanessa. You have no family, no connections, and no power. I am a Blackwell. The courts in this city belong to people like me. The sheer delusion was staggering. She genuinely believed her last name was a magic spell that could overwrite state property laws. She believed she could fabricate a debt report it without a contract and use the legal system as her personal enforcement squad. I know how much your financial independence means to you, Beatrice continued, dropping her voice into a menacing, mock-sympathetic tone. Liam told me how hard you worked to build your little nest egg. It would be a terrible shame to see all that hard work go up in smoke just because you were too stubborn to pay your rent. Do not ruin your life over pride, Vanessa. Bring me the check. She was digging her own grave with every word she spoke. By threatening to weaponize the credit bureaus against me, she had escalated this from a simple family dispute into a clear case of financial extortion. And she was doing it on an unsecured cellular line. Beatrice, I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft. Do you actually own this condo? The line went dead quiet for a fraction of a second. It was the same hesitation Liam had shown the brief microsecond of panic when the lie was directly challenged. I am the managing owner of that property, she declared, her tone defensive and loud. I make the decisions, I collect the revenue, and I execute the evictions. Do not dare question my authority again. I am not questioning your authority. I lied, smoothly, leaning into the role of the intimidated daughter-in-law she wanted me to be. I'm just trying to understand the logistics. You want a certified bank check? I want it by tomorrow afternoon, she confirmed, sensing my supposed surrender. Bring it to the house. Liam will be here. We can put this ugly business behind us and focus on Chelsea and her engagement party. Do not force my hand, Vanessa. I do not want to ruin you, but I will if you leave me no choice. She hung up the phone. The line beeped in my ear. I placed the phone down next to the forged eviction notice and laughed out loud. She wanted a certified check. She wanted to pretend she was the managing owner collecting revenue. She was so blinded by her need for caterer money that she was willing to commit her fraud to paper. She had just handed me the exact mechanism I needed to lock her in a federal trap. An eviction notice was a civil matter often messy and easily dismissed in family disputes. But wire fraud, tax fraud, and extortion crossing state and federal banking lines were entirely different beasts. If I just handed her cash, it was a he said she said scenario. If she signed fraudulent tax documents and forged a commercial lease to process a bank check, she was committing a felony. I gathered the fake eviction notice and placed it into a clear plastic folder. This was piece 3 of my evidence dossier. I had the banking ledgers proving Liam was stealing my money. I had the internal property logs proving Beatrice was hiding my occupancy from the building owner. Now I had written proof of her attempt to extort me using the threat of credit destruction. The strategy was fully formed in my mind. I was not going to fight the eviction notice. I was not going to tell her that I owned the building yet. I was going to play the terrified, defeated foster kid. I was going to let her believe that her cruel threat against my credit score had broken my spirit. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city traffic. Beatrice was about to learn a very painful lesson about corporate finance. You never demand a certified check from a forensic accountant unless your paperwork is absolutely flawless. I needed Liam to come back. I needed my cowardly husband to act as the middleman, to push the extortion just a little bit further so I could demand the fake tax forms and the forged lease agreement required to process the payment. The trap was laid. The bait was the $7,500 she desperately needed. Now I just had to wait for Liam to walk through that front door and hand me the matches to burn their entire empire to the ground. Liam did not come home that night. He did not come home Friday either. It wasn't until Saturday morning, roughly 48 hours after Beatrice slipped her ridiculous eviction notice under the door, that the heavy deadbolt finally clicked. I was sitting at the kitchen island nursing my second cup of coffee and reviewing the final drafts of my evidence dossier. The door opened slowly. Liam slipped inside looking like a man who had not slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He closed the door quietly, leaning against it as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't speak immediately. He just stared at me, his gaze shifting nervously between my face and the coffee cup in my hands. I waited. The silence was his to break. "Vanessa," he finally croaked, his voice raw and exhausted. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, not offering a greeting or a smile. He took a hesitant step into the living room, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "My mother told me she gave you notice about the rent." "She gave me an extortion demand wrapped in a fake eviction notice," I corrected mildly, "and she threatened to ruin my credit score if I didn't pay it by yesterday afternoon. Did she send you here to collect her overdue ransom, Liam?" He flinched at the word. "It's not ransom, it's rent, Vanessa. It's what you owe her. And she's serious. She's not playing around. She already called her lawyer. She's drafting the paperwork to report the debt to the bureaus on Monday morning." I took a slow sip of coffee. She can draft whatever she likes. Without a signed lease agreement, she has no legal standing to report a debt. If she tries, I will file a dispute and the bureaus will remove it within 30 days. Liam's face crumpled. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice rising in panic. "She won't stop there. She'll take you to small claims court. She'll bury us in legal fees. She'll make our lives a living hell, Vanessa. Is that what you want? A protracted legal battle over $7,000? Is your pride really worth destroying our marriage?" "My pride," I repeated, setting the coffee cup down with a sharp clink. "This isn't about pride, Liam. This is about fraud. Your mother doesn't own this building." "Yes, she does," he shouted, his desperation peaking. "She manages the entire property. It's practically the same thing. Look, I know $1,500 a month wasn't part of the original plan. I know I told you it was a gift, but things changed. The family needs liquidity right now. We have cash flow issues." "You have cash flow issues," I corrected. "I am perfectly fine. And since when does your family's cash flow problem become my emergency financial burden?" Liam closed the distance between us, bracing his hands on the marble countertop opposite me. He looked frantic, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. "Because we're married. That's what marriage is, Vanessa. You support each other when things get tough. I supported you when you needed a place to live. Now my family needs your help." "You didn't support me when I needed a place to live," I reminded him coldly. "I had a perfectly lovely home that I bought myself. You convinced me to sell it so we could move into this free condo to save money. You lied to me, Liam." "I didn't lie," he insisted, slamming a hand down on the counter. I didn't have the full picture. Mom told me we could stay here. I didn't know she was going to retroactively charge us rent. She sprang it on me right before dinner that night. I didn't know." It was a pathetic defense, and worse, it was a provable lie. But I didn't need to show him the bank ledgers yet. I needed to see how far he would push. "So she sprang it on you," I said slowly, pretending to consider his words. "And instead of defending your wife, you whispered in my ear to just pay it. You watched her ambush me and you took her side." "I was trying to keep the peace," he begged, his eyes wide and pleading. "You don't know what she's like when she's crossed. She'll destroy us, Vanessa. She'll freeze my trust fund. She'll cut me out of the business. I'll lose everything." "You already have nothing, Liam," I said quietly. He froze. What? I said you already have nothing. There is no trust fund. The family business is a mirage. You're broke. Liam stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The panic in his eyes was absolute. That's insane. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I know you've maxed out 3 separate credit cards in the last 4 months. I know you've been siphoning money out of our joint savings account to pay for Chelsea's caterer, her florist, and her bridal boutique. I know you're drowning in debt. Liam and your mother sent you here today because she's out of options. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The truth had finally cornered him, and the fight drained completely out of his posture. He slumped against the counter, burying his face in his hands. A ragged, pathetic sob tore from his throat. I didn't have a choice. He wept, his voice muffled by his hands. Mom said the wedding was non-negotiable. She said the Blackwell reputation depended on it. We had to keep up appearances. The investments haven't been paying out like they used to. The market is soft. We just needed a bridge loan until the next quarter. A bridge loan. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You stole $40,000 from your own wife to pay for your sister's party, and you call it a bridge loan. And when you ran out of my money to steal, you and your mother cooked up a fake rent demand to extort me for the rest. That's not a bridge loan, Liam. That's felony embezzlement. Liam dropped his hands, his face streaked with tears and splotchy red. He looked utterly broken, stripped of all the arrogant bravado that usually defined him. It's not like that, he pleaded, reaching out across the counter toward my hand. I pulled back instantly. We just need the $7,500. That's all, Vanessa. I swear to God. If Mom doesn't get that money today, the caterer is going to cancel Chelsea's engagement party tonight. They demanded the final deposit by noon or they're walking. There it was. The absolute truth, stripped of all its pretentious high society dressing. The great Blackwell real estate empire was about to be humiliated because they couldn't afford finger foods for a cocktail party. And Beatrice was willing to commit wire fraud to prevent that embarrassment. The caterer, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. Your mother threatened to destroy my financial future, ruin my credit, and evict me from my home. Also, she could pay a caterer for a party you can't afford. It's the engagement party, Liam whined, entirely missing the point. All of Mom's important clients will be there. The board members, the investors. If the caterer cancels, it's over. Everyone will know we're struggling. The investors will pull out. The business will collapse. We'll lose everything, Vanessa. You're already losing everything, I stated plainly. Because you built it on lies. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically. Please, I'm begging you, just this once. You have money in your retirement accounts. You can take a hardship withdrawal. It takes 3 days, but you could write Mom a check today to cover it. I'll pay you back. I swear on my life I'll pay you back every single cent. Just give her the money so the party can go forward. The sheer audacity of his request was staggering. He was begging me to liquidate my retirement savings, the money I had bled for, saved for, and guarded my entire adult life to fund his sister's vanity project. He was asking me to immolate my future to keep his family's pathetic charade alive for one more night. You want me to cash out my 401k? I said slowly, making sure I fully understood his depravity. To pay for Chelsea's engagement party. It's just a temporary withdrawal, he insisted, his tone shifting from pleading to frantic justification. You can replenish it later. We just need the cash today, Vanessa. If you don't do this, my family is ruined. My mother will never forgive me. Please, you have to save us. I looked at the man I had married. I looked at the tears on his face, the desperation in his posture, the complete absence of any moral compass or loyalty to his wife. He was not a partner. He was a parasite. And he had just handed me the final irrefutable proof that he would gladly sacrifice my life to protect his mother's ego. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into a mask of reluctant, terrified compliance. I let my shoulders slump, mirroring his defeat. I needed him to believe he had won. I needed him to believe that his emotional manipulation had worked. Okay, I whispered, making my voice shake just a fraction. Okay, Liam. I'll pay it. Relief crashed over him so intensely he actually sagged against the counter. "Oh, thank God," he breathed, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Thank you, Vanessa. I promise I'll make this right. You're saving my family. Thank you." "But I need the paperwork," I said, cutting off his gratitude. "I'm not writing a check for $7,500 without a proper paper trail. If I'm dipping into my retirement, my accountant is going to need documentation for the withdrawal penalty." Liam frowned confusion, replacing the relief. "What kind of documentation?" "A formal lease agreement," I said smoothly. "If Beatrice is charging me rent, I need a signed lease confirming the amount and the terms, and I need a verified W-9 tax form from the property owner to process the payment. It's standard procedure for a withdrawal of this size. I can't just hand her cash." "A W-9?" Liam asked, clearly out of his depth regarding basic financial regulations. "Mom just wants a check. She wants a certified bank check according to her eviction notice," I corrected him. "The bank will require documentation for a certified check drawn against a retirement account. Tell Beatrice to draw up a formal lease and fill out a W-9 listing herself as the sole proprietor of this building. If she brings those documents to the engagement party tonight, I will hand her the certified check." Liam hesitated. He knew Beatrice hated paperwork, especially paperwork that legally bound her to anything. But he was desperate. He needed that caterer paid, and I had just offered him the only lifeline available. "Okay," he agreed quickly, nodding his head. "Okay, a lease and a W-9. I'll call her right now. I'll tell her to print them out. You'll bring the check to the party tonight. I'll have the payment ready," I promised, my voice perfectly steady. "Just make sure the documents are legally binding and signed by her. No mistakes, Liam." "I will," he swore, already pulling his phone from his pocket and backing toward the door. "Thank you, Vanessa. You won't regret this." He turned and practically ran out of the apartment, eager to deliver the good news to his mother. I watched the door close, the silence returning to the condo. I wouldn't regret it, but Beatrice Blackwell was about to regret the day she ever learned to forge a signature. She wanted to play landlord. I was going to let her sign the paperwork to prove it right before I handed it over to a federal prosecutor. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me in the profound silence of my own home. Liam had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. I walked back into my home office and sat at my desk, opening a secure encrypted email channel to my corporate attorney, David. I typed out a swift summary of the situation. I explained that an employee of our property management company was currently attempting to extort me using forged documents, and that I was expecting to receive the evidence via electronic transmission within the hour. David replied 3 minutes later with a single sentence: "Send me everything the moment it arrives." I did not have to wait long. Less than 45 minutes after Liam sprinted out of my apartment, my inbox chimed with a new message. The sender was Beatrice Blackwell. The subject line read simply, "Legal documents required for rent payment." I clicked open the email and felt a wave of cold satisfaction wash over me. Beatrice could not resist adding her own toxic commentary to the message. The body of the email was dripping with the trademark Blackwell arrogance. It read, "Vanessa, Liam informed me of your ridiculous bureaucratic demands. I find it insulting that you require paperwork for a family transaction, but since you insist on being difficult, I have attached the documents you requested. I expect you to bring the certified check for $7,500 to Chelsea's engagement party tonight. Do not be late and do not make a scene. We have important investors attending, and I will not let your petty grievances ruin my daughter's evening." I downloaded the 2 attached PDF files. The first document was a residential lease agreement. It was a standard commercial template, likely ripped straight from a quick legal forms website, but Beatrice had filled in the blanks with devastating precision. She listed herself as sole property owner and landlord. She listed me as the tenant. She detailed the monthly rent as $1,500 and explicitly stated that failure to pay the attached arrears would result in immediate eviction and credit reporting. She had even signed the bottom in her sweeping, dramatic cursive handwriting. It was a fraudulent contract fabricated to steal money for a catering deposit. But the second document was the real prize. I opened the W-9 tax form. The Internal Revenue Service Form, W-9, is a federal document used to verify a person's taxpayer identification number for financial transactions. Falsifying a federal tax document is a crime. Sending a falsified federal tax document across servers via email constitutes wire fraud. Beatrice had filled out the form completely. She checked the box for sole proprietor. She entered her own social security number. She signed and dated the bottom under the perjury warning. She declared under penalty of federal law that she was the owner of my building and the rightful recipient of the rental income. She was so blinded by her greed, so desperate to secure the cash to save Chelsea's party, that she completely ignored the legal ramifications of what she was signing. She thought she was dealing with an intimidated foster kid. She had no idea she had just handed a forensic accountant a signed confession to multiple felonies. I attached both documents to a new email and forwarded them directly to David. I added a brief note. Please verify the legal implications of these attachments. The sender does not own the property. My phone rang less than 10 minutes later. David sounded wide awake and entirely serious. Vanessa, he said, his voice dropping into his professional courtroom register, please tell me you did not solicit these documents with the intention of paying this woman. I am absolutely not paying her, I replied, staring at the fraudulent signature on my screen. She demanded rent for a condo I own. I simply told my husband that if his mother wanted a certified check from my retirement account, she needed to provide a lease and a tax form. She generated and emailed these documents entirely on her own. I hear you typing, David. What is the verdict? There was a pause on the line as he reviewed the files. The verdict is that Beatrice Blackwell just committed several serious crimes, David confirmed. By falsifying a federal tax form to obtain financial gain, she committed tax fraud. By sending these forged documents via email to extort money, she committed wire fraud. And by claiming ownership of a property she merely manages, she breached her employment contract with your holding company. She handed you a loaded gun, Vanessa. That is exactly what I thought, I said, a genuine smile forming on my face. She is hosting her daughter's engagement party in the penthouse lounge of my building tonight. She expects me to show up and hand her a certified check in front of her high society friends. I plan to attend, and I plan to give her an envelope, but it will not contain a check. What are you giving her? David asked, a hint of amusement breaking through his strict professionalism. I am giving her a notice of immediate termination for embezzlement and gross misconduct, I stated clearly. I want you to draft it right now. Detail the fraudulent lease, the fake tax form, and the misuse of the building occupancy logs. I want it on official corporate letterhead. Have a courier deliver a hard copy to my door within the next 2 hours. Consider it done, David said. Do you need me to alert local law enforcement? I looked at the clock on my desk. Not yet, I instructed. I want Beatrice to put on her show. I will hand her the notice myself. Once she reads it, I will call. Just have the paperwork ready. I hung up and closed my laptop. The trap was set. Beatrice demanded I bring the payment to the penthouse. I will give her exactly what she asked for. I spent the rest of the afternoon working in absolute tranquility. At 6 o'clock, I closed my laptop and moved to the master bedroom to prepare for the evening. I did not choose my outfit lightly. If I was going to execute a corporate firing and a property eviction in the middle of a high society engagement party, I needed to look like the executioner. I selected a tailored emerald green suit, sharp and unyielding, paired with a subtle but undeniably expensive diamond necklace I had purchased after closing my first major corporate audit. I applied my makeup with military precision. Inside my handbag sat the crisp, heavy stock envelope containing Beatrice's immediate termination notice, hand delivered by my lawyer's courier exactly as promised. I stepped out of my condo and walked down the hallway to the private elevator bank. I pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse resident lounge. When the polished steel doors slid open, I stepped out into a scene of staggering financial irresponsibility. The penthouse lounge of the building was a space I knew intimately. When my limited liability company purchased the property a year ago, I had personally overseen the renovation of this exact floor, approving the imported Italian marble, the custom brass lighting fixtures, and the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows that offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the city skyline. Now that beautiful space was suffocated beneath an avalanche of grotesque floral arrangements. Massive pillars of white roses and imported orchids flanked the entrance. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, wagyu beef tartare, and glasses of vintage champagne. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, positioned near a custom ice sculpture carved into the shape of a swan. I mentally calculated the cost of the room. The flowers alone easily surpassed $20,000. The catering, the staff, the premium open bar. This was a $100,000 event, exactly as Chelsea had boasted. And sitting in my bank account ledgers was the absolute proof that my stolen salary had paid for a significant fraction of this absurd vanity project. The room was packed with roughly 80 guests. These were not close family friends or childhood companions. I recognized the distinct posture of venture capitalists, real estate developers, and local politicians. Beatrice had not thrown an engagement party for her daughter. She had orchestrated a networking event to project an illusion of immense wealth to the city's financial elite. She was using this party to secure future investments, entirely unaware that the foundation of her empire was a house of cards I was about to blow down. I spotted Liam near the ice sculpture. He was holding a glass of scotch, nodding enthusiastically at an older man in a tailored suit. Liam looked immaculate on the outside, but my trained eye caught the micro-expressions of sheer panic. He was drinking too fast. He kept shifting his weight. His eyes constantly darted toward the elevator doors, scanning the crowd. He was waiting for me. He was waiting for the $7,500 check that would keep this entire fraudulent circus from crashing down around his ears. He caught my eye across the room. I offered him a flat, cold smile. He visibly swallowed hard and quickly looked away, pretending to be deeply engrossed in his conversation. I moved slowly through the crowd, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. I blended into the background, a silent observer in my own building. I passed by Chelsea, who was holding court near the panoramic windows. She wore a glittering custom designer gown that hugged her figure, a diamond engagement ring flashing blindingly on her finger as she gestured wildly. She was surrounded by a circle of women who looked equally spoiled and vapid. "We are looking at properties in the south of France for the actual wedding," Chelsea bragged loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the jazz music. "Mom insists on an overseas destination. She says the Blackwell family legacy demands international elegance. My fiancé is scouting chateaux next month." I took a sip of my water, masking my amusement. Her fiancé, a bland-looking man currently ignoring her to talk to a bartender, was an entry-level financial analyst who drove a leased car. There would be no chateau in the south of France. By tomorrow morning, there would not even be a catering budget for a backyard barbecue. But the true star of this delusion was Beatrice. I located my mother-in-law standing near the center of the lounge, perfectly positioned beneath the largest brass chandelier. She wore a floor-length midnight blue gown, dripping in what I highly suspected were rented diamonds. She was surrounded by a captive audience of 4 older, wealthy-looking men. I recognized 2 of them as prominent local property developers. I stepped behind a massive display of orchids, perfectly concealed, but well within earshot. I wanted to hear exactly how she was selling her lies to the public. "The views are certainly unparalleled," Beatrice announced, gesturing expansively toward the city skyline. When I acquired this building, I knew immediately that the penthouse level had to be reserved for private resident events. It is crucial to maintain a standard of absolute luxury for my tenants. They pay a premium for the Blackwell experience, and I personally ensure every detail meets my exacting standards. One of the developers, a bald man with a thick gold watch, nodded appreciatively. "It is a stunning property, Beatrice. The market value on a high-rise like this in the current economic climate is astronomical. You must be fielding buyout offers constantly." Beatrice let out a practiced musical laugh. "Oh, constantly. Every week my broker brings me a new offer from some overseas conglomerate. But I always turn them down. This building is a cornerstone of my portfolio. It generates phenomenal passive income, and frankly, I have a sentimental attachment to it. It is where my son and his new wife are currently residing. I like keeping my family close to my investments. I gripped my glass tighter. The sheer audacity was staggering. She was standing in a lounge that my corporate funds had built, bragging to seasoned real estate developers about rejecting imaginary buyout offers for a building she did not own. She was claiming my property as her cornerstone investment. She was using my asset to establish her credibility in the local market. It was a level of narcissistic delusion that bordered on clinical insanity. She believed her own lies. She had told this story so many times, played this character for so long, that she actually believed she was the tycoon she pretended to be. The bald developer took a sip of his bourbon. I am curious about your contractor, Beatrice. The marble work in the lobby and here in the lounge is exquisite. Imported Calicut, I presume. Beatrice did not miss a beat. Yes, imported directly from Tuscany. I spent weeks personally negotiating with the quarry directors in Italy. I told my sourcing team that we would not compromise on the materials. It cost a small fortune, but as I always say, you have to spend money to make money. The return on investment has been spectacular. I closed my eyes for a brief second, steadying my breathing. I remembered signing the purchase orders for that marble. I remembered the endless late-night video calls with the Italian suppliers, verifying the shipping manifests and custom duties. Beatrice had never spoken to a quarry director in her life. She was parroting buzzwords she had likely heard on a home renovation television show, stealing my late nights, and my financial risk to build her counterfeit persona. A catering manager approached Beatrice, interrupting her grand monologue. He leaned in and whispered something urgently in her ear. Even from my concealed vantage point, I saw the instantaneous flash of panic strike Beatrice's face. The caterer was asking for the final payment. He was threatening to cut off the food service if the account was not settled immediately. Beatrice waved him off with a tight, dismissive hand gesture, offering a fake smile to her audience. Just a minor logistical detail with the staff, she assured the developers. Please excuse me for just one moment. I must ensure the champagne continues to flow. Beatrice turned away from the group, her smile vanishing the second her back was turned to the wealthy investors. Her eyes scanned the crowded room with frantic, desperate intensity. She was looking for Liam. More importantly, she was looking for me. The deadline had arrived. The caterers were demanding their money, and her entire house of cards was about to collapse in front of the exact people she was trying to impress. She needed the $7,500 certified check I had promised to bring. She needed my money to pay the men in the white tuxedos before they packed up the caviar and walked out the door. I stepped out from behind the orchid display, placing my empty glass on a passing waiter's silver tray. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald jacket and touched the hidden pocket of my handbag, feeling the stiff edge of the termination envelope. Beatrice was currently marching across the marble floor, her face a mask of furious determination, heading straight toward Liam. It was time to put the arrogant property manager out of her misery. I walked purposefully through the sea of guests, my gaze locked onto my mother-in-law. The ambush at the Sunday family dinner was about to be returned in kind, only this time the consequences would be absolutely permanent. I navigated the crowded, opulent room with the calculated, methodical precision of a predator zeroing in on its final target. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the overwhelming fragrance of the imported white roses Chelsea had demanded. Waiters wove seamlessly through the glittering crowd, carrying trays of champagne, but my focus remained entirely locked ahead. Beatrice had reached Liam near the towering swan ice sculpture. She was gripping his forearms so tightly, her knuckles were stark white against his dark suit jacket, her lips moving rapidly as she hissed urgent, frantic instructions into his ear. Liam looked like he was going to be physically ill. His complexion had turned a sickly pale gray, and sweat beaded along his hairline. He kept shaking his head in quick, jerky motions, his eyes darting wildly around the room, in a state of absolute terror, until they locked onto me. He froze completely. Beatrice followed his gaze. The transformation on her face was instantaneous and chilling. The desperate, panicked mother, terrified of a cancelled catering contract, vanished instantly, replaced by the haughty, untouchable real estate magnate she pretended to be. She let go of Liam, smoothed the front of her midnight blue gown, and squared her shoulders, her chin lifting as she prepared for a public battle. She did not walk toward me. She stood her ground, forcing me to come to her, attempting to assert dominance by making me cross the vast expanse of the marble floor, like a subordinate reporting to a superior for punishment. I obliged her. I bravely walked straight into the lion's den, my posture impeccably straight, my expression an unreadable mask. As I approached the ice sculpture, I noticed the two prominent property developers she had been speaking with earlier had migrated over to the open bar, positioning themselves just a few feet away. They were nursing their drinks, watching the family dynamic unfold, with the casual, morbid curiosity of men who enjoyed a good corporate bloodbath. Chelsea was also closing in from the opposite side of the lounge. Her heavy custom silk gown rustled loudly as she marched across the room, a triumphant smirk plastered across her heavily made-up face, eager to witness my total submission. The audience was perfectly assembled, ready for a show. "Well," Beatrice said, her voice artificially loud and carrying clearly over the soft jazz music floating through the room. "I see you finally decided to join us, Vanessa. I was beginning to worry you had run away from your financial responsibilities again. It is so hard to teach people proper fiscal etiquette when they grew up without any." Several wealthy guests standing nearby stopped their private conversations and turned to look at our little circle. Beatrice thrived on an audience. She desperately wanted witnesses. She wanted these investors to see her put a freeloading tenant in her place. She deeply believed that crushing me publicly would cement her status as a ruthless, powerful landlord who commanded absolute respect. "I would never miss such an important family event," I replied, my tone perfectly even and pleasant. "I told Liam earlier today that I would bring exactly what you asked for." Liam stepped forward, his face slick with nervous sweat. He tried to physically step between us, playing the desperate peacemaker, trying to avoid an explosion. "Okay, great," Liam stammered, holding both of his hands up in a placating gesture. "You brought it. That is fantastic news. Let us just step into the private hallway for a quick second and handle the business privately. We do not need to do this out here in the middle of the party, in front of everyone." "Nonsense," Beatrice barked, stepping aggressively around her son to close the physical distance between herself and me. "We do not hide our business in this family. Vanessa has been living in one of my premier luxury units for 5 entire months without paying a single dime. She has been shamelessly taking advantage of my maternal generosity. These gentlemen," Beatrice gestured widely to the developers standing by the bar, "know exactly how difficult the property management business can be in this economy. You simply cannot let ungrateful tenants walk all over you, no matter who they happen to be married to." The bald developer chuckled very politely, swirling the ice in his glass and raising his expensive bourbon in a gesture of shared solidarity with his fellow wealthy landlord. "Business is a tough game, Beatrice. You have to draw the line somewhere, or they will bleed you dry." "Exactly," Beatrice agreed, her confidence swelling to massive proportions as she received verbal validation from a legitimate millionaire. I gave this girl a chance. I graciously opened my doors to her when she had nowhere else to go. And how does she repay my kindness? By making a horrific scene at our family dinner and flatly refusing to pay her fair share of the rent. It is completely unacceptable behavior. But today is a new day, and I am a fair, reasonable woman. I gave her an ultimatum. Pay the past due balance in full or face immediate eviction and absolute financial ruin. Chelsea eagerly joined the circle, sliding her arm tightly through her mother's and glaring at me with a look of pure, unconcealed disgust and entitlement. "You really push things to the absolute limit, Vanessa. Mom is hosting my engagement party tonight. This is supposed to be the most important evening of my life. She has 100 different things to worry about, and you are selfishly stressing her out over a pathetic little rent check. You should be thoroughly embarrassed to even show your face here tonight." I am not embarrassed at all, Chelsea, I said, maintaining my calm composure despite her venomous attack. I am just fulfilling a request. Your mother sent me a very specific legal document yesterday demanding payment, and I am here to address it. Liam grabbed my elbow, his grip painfully tight as his fingers dug into the fabric of my emerald suit. He pulled me slightly toward him, his voice dropping into a frantic, hyperventilating whisper meant only for me. Do you have the certified check, Vanessa? Tell me you brought the check. The caterer is literally threatening to shut down the kitchen right now. They are going to pull the hot food and walk out the door. Give Mom the check so she can endorse it over to them immediately. Please, I am begging you. Do not ruin this. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then back up to his terrified, pleading eyes. I brought exactly what I was asked to bring, Liam. I promised you I would handle it, and I always keep my promises. Beatrice clapped her hands together, a sharp, commanding sound that drew even more curious eyes to our little circle. The jazz quartet had just finished a song, and in the brief, heavy lull between numbers, Beatrice's voice echoed across the penthouse lounge, loud and demanding. Then let us conclude this unpleasantness right now, Beatrice announced loudly. I sent you an eviction notice, Vanessa. I demanded $7,500 in certified funds. I even went out of my way to provide you with a formal residential lease agreement and my personal federal tax documents because you stubbornly insisted on bureaucratic red tape to release the funds. I humored your ridiculous little demands because I am a patient woman. Now it is time to pay the piper, you ungrateful girl. Hand the check over to me right now. I stood perfectly still, letting her vicious words hang in the silent air. She had just publicly confessed to everything. In front of her cowardly son, her entitled daughter, 2 major real estate investors, and at least a dozen other wealthy guests, Beatrice Blackwell had loudly confirmed that she issued an eviction notice, demanded cash, and produced federal tax documents claiming ownership of the building. She had willingly and joyfully tightened the legal noose around her own neck just to score a few cheap ego-boosting points in front of a captive audience. I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this right here, Beatrice? I asked, offering her one final fleeting opportunity to back down and save herself. This is a very public setting. There are a lot of people watching us. Once we exchange these documents, there is no going back. The transaction will be legally finalized. Do not try to stall me with idle, empty threats, Beatrice sneered, stepping so close I could smell the sharp, expensive perfume she wore. You have absolutely zero power here. You are standing in my building, drinking my water, breathing my air. You owe me for the roof over your head. I want my money, and I want it right this second, or I will call building security and have you physically thrown out into the dirty street. Hand it over. Chelsea laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound, pulling out her phone and pointing the camera directly at me. I should record this for my social media. The great arrogant Vanessa finally being put in her place and begging for mercy. Hand over the money, you leech. Liam squeezed his eyes tightly shut, physically, unable to watch the train wreck unfold. He knew his family was behaving like absolute monsters, but his deep-seated fear of his mother and his total desperation to cover his own catastrophic financial ruin kept him completely paralyzed. He was entirely useless, a pathetic bystander in his own marriage. I took a deep breath and reached into my designer handbag. The movement was slow, deliberate, perfectly designed to build the tension to its absolute breaking point. I felt the thick, crisp edge of the heavy stock envelope resting at the very bottom of my bag. It was not a thin bank envelope containing a check. It was a thick, substantial corporate document package. I pulled it out and held it securely between my fingers. Beatrice's eyes locked onto the white envelope with ravenous, animalistic hunger. The crushing panic regarding the caterer had been eating her alive all evening, and now her salvation was mere inches away. She reached out her manicured hand, her fingers twitching with greedy anticipation. She expected a certified bank check. She expected to immediately endorse the back of it and hand it to the angry catering manager waiting furiously by the service elevators. I did not hand it to her immediately. I held it up, elevating it just enough to make sure everyone around us could clearly see the thick, stark white envelope bearing the embossed golden seal of my corporate attorney's prestigious law firm. Just to be completely clear, Beatrice, I said, my voice projecting with crystal clarity across the lounge, you sent me a W-9 tax form yesterday afternoon. You signed it under penalty of perjury, swearing to the federal government that you are the sole proprietor and owner of this high-rise building. Is that correct? Beatrice rolled her eyes, heavily exasperated by my persistent legal technicalities. Yes, I signed your stupid tax form. I am the owner. I make the rules. Now give me the envelope so I can pay my staff. And you also sent me a residential lease agreement. I continued, deliberately ignoring her outstretched, demanding hand. You signed it as the landlord, claiming you have the legal right to collect rent for the penthouse condo and the authority to execute an eviction if I refuse to pay you. Is that also correct? I am losing my patience, Vanessa. Beatrice hissed, her teeth bared in a vicious snarl. I am the landlord. You are the tenant. I have every single legal right to collect exactly what you owe me right now. Stop talking and give me the money. I did not make her wait a single second longer. I extended my arm and placed the heavy white envelope directly into her outstretched palm. Beatrice snatched it from my grip with the speed and ferocity of a starving animal. She did not even bother to excuse herself from the wealthy developers standing nearby. She just ripped into the top of the sealed envelope, her acrylic nails tearing through the expensive paper. She reached inside her fingers, searching for the familiar rectangular shape of a certified bank check. I watched her face closely. I watched the triumphant, arrogant sneer freeze completely. Her fingers encountered thick, folded pages instead of a single slip of paper. She pulled the document out. It was a 3-page legal notice printed on the official embossed letterhead of my corporate attorney. Beatrice stared at the first page. Her eyes darted back and forth across the bold black text at the very top. For a moment, her brain could not process what she was reading. She had built this entire high-stakes confrontation around receiving cash, and the sudden deviation from her script left her temporarily paralyzed. Liam leaned over his mother's shoulder, desperately trying to read the document. What is it? He asked, his voice shaking. Is it the check? Is the money in there? Beatrice blinked, shaking her head slightly as if trying to clear a fog. Then she threw her head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh. The sound was harsh and entirely artificial, designed to mask her initial confusion and project absolute control to the wealthy investors watching our every move. She waved the legal document in the air like a victorious flag. You really are a pathetic little girl, Vanessa, Beatrice announced, her voice booming across the penthouse lounge. She turned to the 2 real estate developers standing at the bar, inviting them to share in the joke. Can you believe the sheer audacity of this child? I demanded my past due rent, and instead of paying her debts like a responsible adult, she brought me a termination notice. She thinks she can just terminate her lease to avoid paying what she owes me. Chelsea let out a dramatic sigh of relief, clearly thrilled by the prospect of my departure. Oh, thank God, Chelsea sneered, crossing her arms over her sequined gown. If you want to terminate your lease and run away because you are too broke to afford the Blackwell lifestyle, then go right ahead. Pack your cheap bags tonight. We can easily find a tenant who actually belongs in a luxury building. Liam, on the other hand, looked like he might collapse from the sheer weight of his panic. He grabbed his mother's arm again. Mom, we cannot let her just break the lease. We need that money today. The caterer is waiting. If she does not pay the $7,500 right now, they are going to shut down the kitchen. Beatrice yanked her arm away from her son, shooting him a withering glare that promised severe punishment later for exposing their financial desperation in public. Beatrice turned her attention back to me, shaking the legal document in my face. You cannot terminate a verbal lease agreement without 30 days' notice, Vanessa. And you certainly cannot use a fake legal document to escape a past due balance. I am rejecting this termination. You are not leaving this building until you hand over a certified check. I will call my lawyers right now and have them file a civil suit for breach of contract. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing mere inches from her furious face. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a woman who held absolute power. You are fundamentally misunderstanding the document you are holding, Beatrice, I said, maintaining unyielding eye contact. Read the bold text at the top of the page again. Read it out loud for your friends here. Beatrice glanced down at the paper, her arrogant smile faltering as she actually processed the legal terminology. That is not a lease termination, I clarified, enunciating every single syllable so the developers at the bar could hear me perfectly. I am not breaking a lease because I do not have a lease. That document is a notice of immediate termination of employment. You are fired, Beatrice. You are officially terminated from your position as property manager for this building, effective immediately for gross misconduct and felony embezzlement. The jazz quartet seemed to fade into the background. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped. The two real estate developers lowered their drinks, their expressions shifting from polite amusement to absolute unadulterated shock. Chelsea stopped smirking, her jaw dropping open as she stared at me in total bewilderment. Liam stumbled backward, physically retreating from the blast radius of my words. Beatrice stood frozen, like a statue, the legal document trembling slightly in her manicured hand. Fired. Beatrice whispered the word, barely escaping her lips. Her voice was devoid of all its previous booming confidence. You cannot fire me. I am the owner of this building. I am the managing director. You do not have the authority to fire anyone. You are completely delusional. I shook my head, keeping my expression perfectly composed and professional. I am not delusional at all. The property management firm that employs you received a duplicate of that exact termination notice 10 minutes ago. They have already locked you out of the internal building management portal. You can no longer log units as vacant to steal the rental income. You can no longer intercept tenant payments to fund your daughter and her lavish parties. And you can no longer pretend to be a real estate mogul when you are nothing more than a corrupt employee who got caught stealing from the cash register. Your days of playing landlord are permanently over. The jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden absence of the upright bass and the saxophone created a vacuum in the penthouse lounge, sucking the remaining air out of the room. The silence that fell over the 80 wealthy guests was absolute and deafening. No one clinked a glass. No one whispered. The two prominent real estate developers standing near the bar lowered their drinks, their eyes darting between Beatrice and me with predatory fascination. They recognized a corporate slaughter when they saw one, and they were mesmerized by the sheer brutality of the execution. Beatrice stood frozen under the glow of the massive brass chandelier. Her face, usually a carefully constructed mask of aristocratic superiority, contorted into a grotesque display of panic and rage. She gripped the termination notice in her trembling hands, crumpling the thick corporate paper. You are out of your mind. Beatrice spat, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to maintain her volume. You cannot fire me from my own property. I am Beatrice Blackwell. I built this empire. I own every brick, every pane of glass, and every square foot of marble in this high-rise. You are a delusional, ungrateful little foster child throwing a temper tantrum because you cannot afford your rent. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout to command the room. True power does not scream. It simply states the facts. You do not own a single brick. Beatrice, I said, my tone as calm and cold as deep water. I reached into my emerald green designer handbag for the second time tonight. My fingers bypassed my wallet and my phone, sliding perfectly over the thick, crisp edges of the most important legal document I possessed. I pulled it out slowly, holding it up so the overhead lights caught the official raised seal of the county clerk office. It was not folded. It was pristine, heavy, and undeniable. Do you know what this is? I asked, turning the document slightly so the real estate developers at the bar could see the distinct formatting of a commercial property deed. This is a warranty deed. It is the ultimate legally binding proof of real estate ownership in this state. It is not a fake invoice printed from a home computer. It is not a fraudulent tax form filled out to extort a catering deposit. This is the absolute truth. Chelsea stepped forward, her custom silk gown rustling loudly in the quiet room. Her face was flushed with indignation, but her eyes betrayed a deep, creeping terror. "Stop lying!" Chelsea shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Mom bought this building 10 years ago. Everyone knows that. You printed a fake paper to try and embarrass us at my engagement party." Liam, make her stop. Liam did not move. He was staring at the warranty deed in my hand as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. He was a coward, but he was not entirely stupid. He saw the raised seal. He saw my absolute lack of fear. He knew the ground was falling out from under his feet. "Your mother did not buy this building 10 years ago, Chelsea," I continued, keeping my gaze locked on Beatrice. 10 years ago, this building was constructed and owned by a commercial development firm called the Sterling Horizon Group. They held the title for 9 years. During that time, they hired a third-party property management company to handle the day-to-day operations. That management company hired an ambitious, status-obsessed woman named Beatrice Blackwell to sit at a desk, collect rent checks, and coordinate plumbing repairs. Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seemed to have seized up. She took a staggering step backward, hitting the edge of a cocktail table. A silver tray of champagne glasses rattled dangerously, the sharp clinking sound echoing like a warning bell. "A year ago," I said, stepping closer to her, ensuring every guest in the room heard my next words perfectly. "The Sterling Horizon Group decided to liquidate their residential assets. They placed this high-rise on the private commercial market. It was an off-market listing handled with extreme discretion. You did not know about the sale, Beatrice, because property managers are not privy to corporate acquisitions. You just collect your modest salary and pretend you hold the keys to the kingdom." I held the deed up higher. "I bought this building." I announced the words, dropping like heavy stones onto the marble floor. 6 months before Liam and I even got married, my private holding company purchased this entire high-rise. Every single floor, the parking garage, the commercial retail space, and this exact penthouse lounge where you are currently standing. The collective gasp from the room was audible. The bald real estate developer at the bar actually choked on his bourbon, coughing into his hand, as he stared at me with newfound profound respect. He understood the staggering financial magnitude of what I had just revealed. Purchasing a luxury high-rise in the downtown district required tens of millions of dollars in liquid capital and ironclad corporate credit. I was not just a wealthy tenant. I was a commercial titan operating entirely in the shadows. "That is impossible." Liam choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate squeak. He finally managed to take a step toward me, his hands shaking wildly. "You are an accountant, Vanessa. You review spreadsheets. You do not have the capital to buy a commercial skyscraper. You told me you owned a starter home in the suburbs." I turned my cold gaze toward my husband. "I told you what you needed to hear, Liam. I grew up with nothing, bouncing between foster homes with all my worldly possessions stuffed into plastic garbage bags. That kind of childhood teaches you to protect yourself. It teaches you to build walls, to accumulate resources, and to never ever show your full hand to people who might try to exploit you. I built a highly lucrative career dismantling corporate fraud. I invest my earnings through blind limited liability companies. I own commercial properties across the city. This high-rise is just one asset in my portfolio." I turned back to Beatrice. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was physically crumbling before my eyes. The heavy layer of expensive makeup on her face could not hide the pallor of absolute defeat. She was breathing rapidly, her chest heaving under the midnight blue gown. "You are lying," Beatrice whispered, shaking her head in a frantic, jerky motion. "You cannot own the building. I am the owner. I tell everyone I am the owner." "Saying it at cocktail parties does not make it a legal reality, Beatrice," I countered, my voice laced with sharp, clinical precision. "When my company acquired the deed, I chose to keep the existing property management firm in place to ensure a smooth transition for the tenants. I kept you on the payroll. You are an employee. You work for me. You have been working for me since the day I bought the building." I took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look at the official warranty deed. Read the name of the purchasing entity, I commanded. Read it out loud. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look at the paper. She was behaving like a petulant toddler trying to wish away a nightmare. Read it, I repeated, my voice cracking like a whip. Chelsea lunged forward, snatching the deed from my hand before I could stop her. She stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the dense legal text until she found the highlighted section detailing the purchasing party. Vanguard Holdings. Chelsea read aloud, her voice trembling. She looked up at me, confusion mixing with her terror. What does that mean? What is Vanguard Holdings? That is my private holding company, I explained, maintaining my rigid composure. I am the sole managing member and majority shareholder. Vanguard Holdings owns the building. Therefore, I own the building. And according to the termination notice currently crushed in your mother's hand, Vanguard Holdings just fired her. The reality of the situation crashed over the family like a tidal wave. They were not just facing an insubordinate daughter-in-law. They were facing a multi-million-dollar corporate landlord whom they had just attempted to extort. I watched the realization shatter Liam completely. He fell to his knees on the marble floor right in front of the ice sculpture. He covered his face with his hands and let out a broken sob. Chelsea dropped the warranty deed onto the floor and backed away from her mother as if Beatrice was suddenly diseased. The rich investors at the bar were already whispering to each other, pulling out their phones to text their colleagues about the massive scandal. The Blackwell family name was dead in this city. I burned it down. I picked up the warranty deed from the marble floor, dusting off a stray piece of lint with deliberate slowness. The silence in the penthouse lounge was absolute, broken only by Liam's pathetic muffled sobbing near the swan ice sculpture. Beatrice stood paralyzed, her chest heaving as her mind desperately tried to construct a new lie, a new escape route from the corner she had painted herself into. She opened her mouth, her jaw working furiously, but I did not give her the chance to utter a single word of defense. I turned my attention away from my hyperventilating mother-in-law and addressed the wider room. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, pitching my voice to reach the wealthy developers standing by the bar. I apologize for interrupting the festivities tonight. I know you were all invited here under the premise of celebrating a high society engagement hosted by one of the city's premier real estate moguls. But since my company is footing the bill for the electricity, the venue, and apparently the catering, I feel obligated to clarify the actual financial standing of your host. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp. Vanessa, stop it right now. You are ruining everything. Do not say another word. I ignored her completely, stepping toward the center of the lounge. Beatrice Blackwell is not a real estate titan, I explained, looking directly at the bald developer who had been praising the imported marble just minutes ago. She does not own a portfolio of high-rise buildings. She does not negotiate with Italian quarry directors for custom stone. She does not reject multi-million-dollar buyout offers from overseas conglomerates. Beatrice is a mid-level salaried employee working for a third-party property management firm. Her actual daily responsibilities consist of logging tenant complaints, calling plumbers to fix leaky toilets, and ensuring the hallway carpets are vacuumed on schedule. She earns $65,000 a year. She is a glorified receptionist with a master key. The bald developer raised his eyebrows, looking at Beatrice with a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. The other guests began whispering furiously, the illusion of the great Blackwell dynasty crumbling before their eyes. Chelsea covered her face with her hands, shrinking back against the panoramic windows as the socialite status she had worshipped her entire life evaporated into thin air. You are lying, Chelsea cried out, her voice muffled behind her hands. My mother is rich. We have a family trust. We are Blackwells. You are deeply in debt, Chelsea, I corrected sharply, turning my gaze to the spoiled daughter. There is no family trust. Your mother drives a leased car she cannot afford. Your brother is drowning in credit card debt. And this entire empire you brag about is nothing more than a pathetic fantasy constructed to trick wealthy people into paying attention to you. But the fantasy was expensive to maintain, was it not? Keeping up appearances in this city requires a massive amount of liquid cash. And when the credit cards were maxed out and the personal loans were denied, Beatrice had to find a new revenue stream to fund your extravagant lifestyle. I turned back to Beatrice, pacing slowly around her like a shark circling wounded prey. When my company Vanguard Holdings purchased this building 6 months ago, I decided to conduct a blind audit of the property management firm. I do this for all my commercial acquisitions to ensure maximum operational efficiency. I did not announce my ownership to the staff. I simply monitored the internal accounting systems from a distance. And what I found was a textbook example of corporate embezzlement. Beatrice was shaking her head violently, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. She looked cornered, trapped by the overwhelming weight of her own crimes. No, she whimpered, taking another step back. You cannot prove anything. I kept the books perfectly. I balanced the ledgers. You manipulated the occupancy logs, Beatrice, I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. It is the oldest and laziest scam in the property management playbook. You identified several luxury units in this building that were recently vacated. Instead of listing them as available on the open market, you marked them as permanently vacant in the internal management system. Then you moved private off-the-books tenants into those units. You demanded their rent payments in untraceable cash or direct wire transfers to your personal accounts. Because the management system registered the units as empty, the corporate owner never expected to see any revenue from those specific apartments. You essentially created a ghost hotel inside my building, and you pocketed every single dime of the illicit profits. The collective gasp from the room was audible. The sheer audacity of the crime was staggering to the corporate investors in the room. They understood exactly how much money a scam like that could generate in a luxury downtown high-rise. And you got incredibly greedy. I continued, my voice gaining momentum as I delivered the final crushing blows to her reality. You needed a massive influx of cash to pay for this absurd engagement party. You needed $100,000 for caviar white roses and vintage champagne to impress people who do not even care about you. So you moved your broke son and his new wife into one of your designated ghost units. You told us it was a free wedding gift to mask the transaction. But when the catering bills came due and your funds ran dry, you panicked. You printed a fake invoice on your home computer. You ambushed me at a family dinner demanding thousands of dollars in back rent for an apartment you were actively hiding from the building's rightful owner. I pointed directly at the lavish buffet table spread across the room. You see those imported truffles? You see the champagne towers and the custom ice sculpture? Every single item in this room was funded by stolen money. Beatrice Blackwell did not pay for this party. She financed it by defrauding her employer, embezzling corporate funds, and attempting to extort her own daughter-in-law. You are all drinking stolen wine hosted by a common thief. Beatrice let out a guttural, wounded sound. She lunged forward, her hands raised as if she intended to physically attack me. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, my posture rigid and challenging. She stopped inches away, her hands dropping uselessly to her sides as the reality of her powerlessness fully settled into her bones. She was nothing. She had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no escape. "You set me up!" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with absolute malice. "You planned this from the very beginning. You married my son just to infiltrate my building and destroy my family. You are a vindictive, evil woman." I laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that cut right through her pathetic attempt at deflecting the blame. "I did not set you up, Beatrice. I married Liam because I genuinely believed he loved me. I believed I was marrying into a warm, supportive family. I had no idea you were running a criminal enterprise out of my basement. You set your own trap the moment you decided your greed was more important than basic human decency. You could have walked away. You could have left me alone. But your massive, fragile ego demanded that you humiliate the foster child. You needed to prove you were superior. You handed me forged federal tax documents because you were too arrogant to believe I would actually verify them. You destroyed your own family, Beatrice. I am just the auditor presenting the final receipt." Chelsea was sobbing loudly by the windows, her heavy makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "My wedding is ruined," she wailed, sinking to the floor in a heap of expensive silk. Everything is ruined. How am I supposed to pay for anything now? My friends are going to laugh at me. We are completely broke. Liam remained on his knees near the ice swan, rocking back and forth. He looked utterly pathetic, a grown man entirely broken by the collapse of his mother's financial illusions. He had sacrificed his marriage, his integrity, and his future just to protect a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a tool to secure her next extortion payment. I looked around the room. The wealthy guests were already moving toward the exits, eager to distance themselves from the toxic radioactive fallout of the Blackwell family scandal. The real estate developers had vanished, slipping into the elevator bank without a backward glance. The jazz musicians were quietly packing up their instruments, sensing that the event was permanently over. The grand, expensive illusion was dead, reduced to ashes on the imported marble floor. I turned my attention back to Beatrice one last time. She looked incredibly small, a hollow shell of a woman stripped of her stolen armor. "You wanted to play the role of the ruthless landlord?" I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that only she could hear. "You wanted to issue eviction notices and demand compliance. Well, Beatrice, consider yourself officially evicted from my property. You have absolutely no authority here. You have no wealth. You have no status. You are just a criminal waiting for the authorities to arrive." I turned away from her, my emerald green suit, pristine, my posture victorious. I walked toward the panoramic windows, leaving the ruined matriarch standing alone in the center of her stolen party. I had completely dismantled her reality, and I felt nothing but absolute, untouchable peace. The panoramic windows reflected the glittering city lights, casting a cold, unyielding glow across the penthouse lounge. I stood perfectly composed, absorbing the magnitude of the silence behind me. The sound of footsteps dragging across the imported Italian marble broke the stillness. It was a pathetic shuffling noise. I did not need to turn around to know it was my husband. Liam had finally peeled himself off the floor by the melting swan ice sculpture. "Vanessa," Liam croaked. His voice was completely devoid of the arrogant, booming confidence he usually projected to the world. It was a hollow, reedy sound, the voice of a man who had just watched his entire universe vaporize. I turned slowly, letting my gaze sweep over his disheveled form. His expensive designer suit, likely purchased on a maxed-out credit card, was wrinkled. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and his eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me not with anger, but with a profound, staggering confusion. "Why did you not tell me?" Liam asked, his hands trembling as he gestured vaguely toward the room, the building, the city outside. "You are a millionaire. You own this entire skyscraper. You have a private holding company. I am your husband. We stood at an altar and promised to share our lives. Why would you hide something this massive from me? If I had known you had this kind of capital, we would not be in this mess. We could have avoided all of this." The sheer audacity of his statement almost made me laugh. He was actually trying to spin my financial independence into a betrayal of our marriage vows. He was trying to blame his own catastrophic failures on my decision to protect my assets. "You think my wealth is the reason we are in this mess?" I asked, keeping my tone dangerously soft. "You think that if I had handed you the keys to my corporate accounts, you would have suddenly become a responsible, honest partner? Let us be entirely clear about who kept secrets in this marriage, Liam." He swallowed hard, taking a hesitant step backward. "I just wanted us to be a team," he whimpered. "A team," I repeated, stepping away from the window and closing the distance between us. "A team requires trust. When we got married, I agreed to open a joint savings account with you because you told me it was the responsible thing to do. I deposited my salary, my bonuses, and my consulting fees into that account every single month. I trusted you to manage our household budget because you swore you were a financial expert handling your family and their massive wealth." Liam looked away, his eyes darting frantically toward the elevators, as if hoping for a miraculous escape. "But you are not a financial expert, Liam." I continued, my voice carrying across the silent room, ensuring Beatrice and Chelsea heard every single word. "You are a fraud. You are a broke, desperate man drowning under a mountain of consumer debt. While I was sitting in my office working 60-hour weeks to secure our future, you were busy logging into our banking portal and robbing me blind." I was going to pay it back. Liam pleaded, tears spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his pale cheeks. I just needed a bridge loan. The wedding expenses were spiraling out of control. Mom said we had to keep up appearances. I was going to replace every dime. You stole $40,000, Liam, I stated, the hard number hitting him like a physical blow. You siphoned $40,000 out of my paycheck in 4 months. I tracked every single wire transfer. I saw the $5,000 you sent to your mother. I saw the $10,000 you wired to the catering company. I saw the $8,000 you dumped into a bridal boutique so your sister could parade around in a custom silk gown. You did not take a bridge loan. You committed domestic theft to finance a lie. Chelsea let out a piercing, hysterical shriek from the other side of the lounge. The reality of my words had finally penetrated her thick skull. She realized the gravity of the situation. There was no secret family trust fund. There was no Blackwell empire. Her entire wedding, her entire social standing was completely dependent on stolen cash that had just been permanently cut off. My wedding! Chelsea wailed, falling to her knees and burying her hands in her perfectly styled hair. The caterer is leaving right now. The florist has not been paid for the reception. My fiancé is going to find out we are broke. The wedding is ruined. My entire life is completely ruined. She rocked back and forth on the marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The spoiled golden child was finally experiencing the crushing weight of reality. There would be no chateaux in the south of France. There would be no high society magazine spreads. She was going to have to call her friends and admit that she was a fraud, living entirely on her sister-in-law and her stolen paycheck. Do not speak to my daughter that way! Beatrice suddenly snapped, her voice harsh and desperate. The disgraced matriarch marched forward, trying to summon the last remaining shreds of her fabricated authority. Her midnight blue gown swept across the floor, but her posture was rigid with panic. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. You have caused enough damage for one night, Vanessa. Beatrice snarled, her eyes wide and manic. You come into my event, you wave around some forged pieces of paper, and you spout ridiculous lies about my son and his finances to humiliate us. I do not care what kind of fake deed you printed out. I am the managing director of this property. I am in charge, and I am officially ordering you to leave this penthouse immediately. I looked at Beatrice, genuinely astounded that she was still trying to play the dictator. She had no moves left, yet she was blindly marching toward the edge of the cliff. Or what, Beatrice? I challenged, tilting my head slightly. What exactly are you going to do? I will call the police, Beatrice threatened, pulling her smartphone out of her designer clutch. Her hands shook violently as she unlocked the screen. You are trespassing on private property. You are disturbing the peace. I will have the authorities come up here right now, put you in handcuffs, and drag you out of this building in front of everyone. Do not test me. I will dial the number. I stood perfectly still, watching her thumb hover over the keypad. The absolute irony of her threat was almost too poetic to believe. She thought invoking the police would terrify me. She thought she could weaponize the law to protect her illegal operation. I slowly raised my left arm, pulling back the cuff of my emerald green blazer to glance casually at my watch. The gold hands indicated it was exactly 8:15. I dropped my arm and looked directly into Beatrice and her frantic, bloodshot eyes. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Save your battery, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that echoed with absolute finality. I already called them. But they aren't here for me. The heavy glass doors of the private elevator bank slid open with a soft melodic chime that cut through the oppressive tension in the penthouse lounge. 4 uniformed police officers stepped into the room, their radios crackling softly. The visual impact of law enforcement crashing a high society engagement party was immediate and devastating. The remaining guests practically flattened themselves against the walls, desperate to avoid any association with whatever criminal enterprise had just been uncovered. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, stepped forward and scanned the room. We received a call regarding a disturbance and allegations of corporate fraud, he announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent lounge. We are looking for Beatrice Blackwell. Beatrice let out a high-pitched, panicked squeak. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the marble floor. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. She looked wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, but the police were already fanning out, securing the exits. I stepped forward, my posture rigid and victorious. "I am the one who called, officer," I stated clearly, gesturing toward my hyperventilating mother-in-law. "That is Beatrice Blackwell. I am the managing director of Vanguard Holdings, the corporate entity that owns this commercial property. Mrs. Blackwell is a property manager employed by our third-party management firm. Over the past 6 months, she has systematically embezzled rental income by fraudulently logging occupied units as vacant." The officer pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket, his expression serious. "Do you have documentation to support these allegations, ma'am?" "I certainly do," I replied, unlocking my smartphone and pulling up the digital dossier I had compiled earlier that morning. "I have complete access to the internal building management logs, which clearly show her user ID manipulating the occupancy status of the penthouse condo. Furthermore, I have absolute proof that she attempted to extort $7,500 from me today to cover the catering deposit for this event." Beatrice finally found her voice. Her hands were shaking violently as she pointed a finger at me. "She is lying!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "I am the owner of this building. She is a disgruntled tenant trying to ruin my family. You cannot arrest me on the word of a crazy woman." The officer turned his attention to Beatrice, his gaze hardening. "Ma'am, if you are the legal owner of this property, can you provide us with a copy of the deed or the title insurance policy right now?" Beatrice opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her pale and drawn. She looked helplessly at Liam, begging her son to intervene, but Liam was still kneeling by the melting ice sculpture, entirely paralyzed by the collapse of his reality. "She cannot produce the deed, officer, because the deed is currently in my handbag," I interjected, keeping my tone deadly calm. "But the embezzlement is just the beginning. I also have digital proof of felony wire fraud and tax fraud." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly recognizing the escalation in legal severity. "Tax fraud is a federal matter, ma'am. We would need to contact the relevant agencies." "I am fully aware," I assured him. Yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Blackwell transmitted 2 documents to my personal email server. The first was a fraudulent residential lease agreement listing herself as the landlord and owner of a property she merely manages. The second was an Internal Revenue Service W-9 tax form. She filled out the federal form, checked the box for sole proprietor, entered her personal social security number, and signed it under penalty of perjury, falsely declaring herself the legal owner of this commercial building to secure a financial payment. The officer's demeanor shifted immediately from local disturbance response to serious criminal investigation. He signaled to the other officers, who moved closer to Beatrice, cutting off any potential retreat. Beatrice realized she was completely cornered. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch finally shattered. She dropped to her knees on the marble floor, her expensive midnight blue gown pooling around her. She began sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. "It was a mistake," Beatrice wailed, her voice echoing pitifully across the lounge. "I just needed a bridge loan to cover the catering. I was going to pay it back." "You cannot do this to me, Vanessa. I am your family. You are destroying the Blackwell legacy. You destroyed your own legacy the moment you decided to commit federal fraud to pay for shrimp cocktails," I replied coldly, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the woman who had tried to extort me. The lead officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "Beatrice Blackwell," he stated firmly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You are under arrest on suspicion of wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate embezzlement. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Chelsea let out a blood-curdling scream as the officer hauled her mother to her feet. The polished high society facade was completely gone, replaced by the ugly reality of a common criminal being walked out of a luxury high-rise. Beatrice sobbed loudly as the cold steel cuffs clicked securely around her wrists. The officers guided her toward the service elevators, marching the disgraced property manager past the shocked caterers and the remaining horrified guests. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing Beatrice's fate, I turned my attention back to the center of the room. Liam was still kneeling on the floor, staring blankly at the space where his mother had just been arrested. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic shell of the confident, wealthy heir he had pretended to be when we first met. I reached into my emerald green handbag one final time. I pulled out a thin manila folder, the very last piece of paperwork I needed to deliver tonight. I walked slowly across the marble floor, stopping just a few feet away from my husband. "Liam," I said quietly. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and empty, completely void of any fight or resistance. He knew it was over. He knew the illusion he had built his entire life upon was permanently destroyed. I held the folder out to him. He stared at it for a long moment before hesitantly reaching out with a trembling hand to take it. He flipped open the cover, his eyes scanning the bold black text on the first page. "It is exactly what it looks like, Liam." I confirmed, my voice steady and resolute. "Those are divorce papers. I have already signed them. My corporate attorney drafted them this afternoon. Given the fact that you actively conspired with your mother to extort me, and given the fact that I have bank ledgers proving you systematically stole $40,000 from my salary, I highly recommend you sign them without a fight." Liam let out a ragged, pathetic breath. He looked down at the divorce papers, the final nail in the coffin of his manufactured life. "You are taking everything," he whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You own the building. You sent my mother to jail. And now you are leaving me with nothing." I shook my head, correcting his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. "I am not taking anything from you, Liam. You never had anything to begin with. You built a marriage on lies. You funded a lifestyle with stolen money. And you stood by like a coward while your mother tried to ruin my financial future. I am just holding you accountable for your own actions." I turned my back on my soon-to-be ex-husband and walked away. The engagement party was officially over. The Blackwell family was destroyed, and I had a commercial property empire to run. 6 months passed with the rapid, undeniable force of a hurricane clearing away dead wood. The fallout from the engagement party was total and absolute. I did not have to lift a finger to destroy the Blackwell family. They had done all the heavy lifting themselves. I simply stood back and watched the legal system process the evidence I had handed over on a silver platter. Beatrice's trial was swift and utterly humiliating. The federal prosecutors did not even have to work hard. She had signed the forged tax documents with her own pen. She had emailed the fake lease across state lines. The property management company, desperate to avoid any implication in her crimes, handed over years of internal communication logs. Those logs proved Beatrice had been systematically identifying vulnerable, wealthy, out-of-town tenants and shaking them down for illegal cash deposits, all while logging their units as vacant. She was not a real estate mogul. She was a petty thief who had finally stolen from the wrong woman. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion. The day she was sentenced, she looked like a completely different person. The expensive midnight blue gowns were gone, replaced by a drab, oversized jumpsuit. The heavy aristocratic makeup was washed away, revealing a terrified elderly woman who finally understood that her last name offered absolutely zero protection against a federal indictment. Chelsea's life imploded almost as spectacularly. Her fiancé, the entry-level financial analyst who had been banking on marrying into the great Blackwell fortune, broke off the engagement less than 48 hours after Beatrice was arrested. He quietly packed his bags, canceled the remaining vendor contracts, and vanished. The $100,000 wedding was permanently canceled. The deposits were forfeited. Chelsea was forced to move out of her luxury apartment because she could no longer afford the rent without Liam stealing my money to subsidize her lifestyle. Last I heard, she was working as a junior sales associate at a suburban department store, bitterly complaining to anyone who would listen about how her evil sister-in-law had ruined her life. And then there was Liam. The divorce was finalized with breathtaking speed. My corporate attorney David handled the negotiations with absolute ruthlessness. I presented Liam with a very simple choice. He could sign the divorce papers, walk away with nothing but the clothes on his back, and assume full responsibility for the $40,000 he stole from me. Or I could hand the banking ledgers over to the district attorney and have him charged as a co-conspirator in his mother's extortion ring. Liam signed the papers without a single word of protest. He knew he had no defense. He was completely broke, drowning under a mountain of maxed-out credit cards, and entirely unemployable in the financial sector after the massive public scandal surrounding his family. Without my salary to drain, and without his mother's stolen cash to prop him up, he was forced into a brutal reality check. He currently works a minimum wage job at a big box hardware store on the edge of the city. He stocks shelves. He wears a polyester vest. He spends his days slowly chipping away at the crushing mountain of debt he accumulated, trying to pretend he was a wealthy heir. I did not feel sorry for any of them. They had looked at a woman who grew up in the foster care system, a woman who had fought for every single dollar she possessed, and they had seen nothing but a target. They thought my background made me weak. They thought my lack of a prominent family name made me vulnerable. They never understood that surviving the system had forged me into something unbreakable. I stood on the rooftop terrace of the downtown high-rise building, the cool evening breeze brushing against my face. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting vibrant streaks of orange and gold across the glass facades of the surrounding towers. I held a glass of expensive red wine, swirling the liquid slowly as I looked out over my empire. This building was mine. Every floor, every condo, every single brick. I had purchased it with the money I earned dismantling financial criminals, and I had successfully defended it against the very same breed of parasite. I had evicted the toxicity from my life with clinical precision. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like absolute, untouchable victory. I did not just survive the Blackwell family. I bought the ground they stood on, forced them to expose their own crimes, and permanently evicted them from my life. I was Vanessa, the foster kid who built a fortress. And from up here on the penthouse roof, the view was absolutely spectacular. If my journey from the foster system to the penthouse of my own building has taught me anything, it is that your greatest armor in life is your independence. We are often conditioned to believe that family is an absolute concept, a bond that demands our unconditional loyalty, our resources, and our silence no matter the cost. But a shared last name or a marriage certificate does not give anyone the right to extort you, diminish you, or use your hard-earned stability to fund their delusions of grandeur. When my mother-in-law handed me that fake eviction notice, she didn't just underestimate my intelligence as a forensic accountant. She misunderstood the fundamental nature of survival. When you build your life from the ground up, brick by brick, you do not surrender the keys to people who only know how to tear things down. The most important lesson I can pass on is this: never apologize for protecting what you have built. Financial independence isn't just about luxury or having your name on a commercial deed. It is about holding the power to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. It is about having the absolute freedom to evict toxicity from your life, whether that toxicity comes from an arrogant in-law or the very person you married. You do not owe your peace of mind or your paycheck to anyone's fragile ego. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace and financial security from manipulative family members? How did you find the courage to finally say enough? Share your stories in the comments below. If this journey of reclaiming power and exposing toxic illusions resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of self-made resilience. Remember, your worth is built by you. Never let anyone else try to collect the rent on it.